As we are all present, and it is for ordinary meeting for 11th of November 2019. If you could all please stand. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. While we're standing, I would like to recognise and acknowledge that we are meeting here today on the traditional land of the Brackalong people of the Gunai Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. If there are any elders here, I would also like to pay my respects to you as well. Councillors, we can seat and move forward. Thank you, councillors. As this is my first chair as the new mayor of this council, I'd just like to recognise that we are going to conduct this meeting in accordance with the Local Law 1 and the procedure of that local law as well. The conditions of entry are that all members of the community attending the council meeting are asked to behave in a courteous and respectful manner before, after and during the meeting. In accordance with the Local Law 1, it is the chair who may order or cause the removal of any person, including a councillor who disrupts the meeting at any time. We are live streaming via YouTube, as we do with all of our council meetings, and it is worthwhile noting if there are any speakers here this evening, you will be recorded during that live stream. You will not be seen, for the camera sits above you at the lectern, but you will be heard. In accordance with Local Law 1, please be advised that a person must not operate an audio tape or any other recording equipment of this meeting without first obtaining consent of the council or the chair, as the case may be. As consent may be at any time during the course of the meeting be revoked by council or the chair. And no one has asked us this evening to do any recording, so we presume that no one is, apart from our live stream. Councillors, apologies or any leave of absence. As I note you are all present, there are no apologies for this evening. The next item on the council agenda is the declarations of interest. If anyone has any declarations of interest, conflicts of interest, or interests, indirect or direct interests, they can declare them at this time or at any point during the council meeting. Does anyone have any interest they need to declare? No? A clean slate? Thank you very much. We move to the adoption of the minutes. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 7th of October 2019 and also the special council meeting that was held on the 21st of October and the special council meeting that was held on the 31st of October. So 3 lots of minutes. Councillor Gibson, I note you.
Happy to move.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howe is seconding. Any opposition? All councillors in favour? Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Move on to acknowledgements. This is an opportunity for councillors to acknowledge members of our community and the work that they do. Are there any councillors who wish to make an acknowledgement?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just briefly like to recognise that today has been Remembrance Day and acknowledge the tremendous efforts of our RSL clubs in their running of the various events throughout our municipality. A job well done. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work that the Yallourn Golf Club and the PGA have put in over a long period of time, but we had the tournament on the weekend, and suffice to say you couldn't have got worse weather if you tried. They persisted. Unfortunately, they didn't get the numbers that they would have had because the course came up a treat, but they did persist, and mind you, they finished when it was dark last night, but it was a great triumph, not just for the golf club and PGA, but for our area in particular. So I'd like to acknowledge all the hard work and effort that was put in. You even had people sleeping in swags to make sure nobody came on the course and did any damage. And considering the weather, I think that really needs to be acknowledged. And also the Moe basketball had their tournament over the weekend, and the number of people who actually stopped me and congratulated me, not just on the association and how they delivered the events, but also our staff with the different facilities, was really pleasing to hear. So I'd just like to acknowledge both of those. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Harriman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. As councillors are probably aware, there's a large number of fires burning in New South Wales and Queensland at the minute. And it was great to see on the weekend 55 trucks as part of 11 strike teams were deployed from Gippsland. A number of those strike teams and a number of those volunteers coming out of Latrobe City Council. And I think it's important we acknowledge them. I would like to point out one person in particular from Traralgon East branch, and that's Lieutenant Stuart Henley, who will be leading one of the strike teams, and it also means that he'll get fined at the start of the footy season next year if I mention him personally. But I think it's, on a serious note, we talk about heroes, and there's a cartoon going around at the moment with a number of comic book superheroes and a firefighter coming in with the comment, "Welcome to the club." I think the difference is that we all know comic book heroes are imaginary, but our firefighters are heroes through and through. And I think particularly as Councillor McFarlane has already recognised today being Remembrance Day, that I think our firefighters, particularly those coming from here, are following in hallowed footsteps. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Are there any other acknowledgements that any of the councillors would like to make? No? Thank you very much, councillors. We move on to public question time. I'll ask the CEO, I think we've got 2 questions that have been put to council, and I'll ask the CEO to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We do have 2 questions. One's from Mr Merv Getters, who I don't think is in the audience tonight, so we'll table his question in our minutes and provide him with a response. That question related to maintenance of waterways in Latrobe City. And the second question is from Dr Sint, who is in the audience tonight, the gallery, and it's related to the landfill at Hazelwood. So the question is, how will Latrobe City Council prevent 75,000 cubic metres of asbestos being used as landfill at Hazelwood, taking into account potential contamination of the water table? And the response is, Latrobe City does not have any regulatory role over the operation of landfills, including the asbestos landfill associated with Hazelwood Power Station. As such, Council does not have any powers to regulate or prevent the disposal of the 75,000 cubic metres of asbestos being disposed at the landfill cell at Hazelwood. And the Environment Protection Authority are the regulatory body that approve and monitor landfill of asbestos. Through both the works approval process and subsequent licence requirements, and the existing asbestos landfill at Hazelwood is licensed by the EPA. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Mr CEO. Councillor Gibson, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given the seriousness of the asbestos, is there any way we could just speak to the EPA to ensure that everything's above board or not?
Mr CEO.
And so, through you, Mr Chair, so the EPA do regularly report on compliance and non-compliances, and there's a website that's available to people can go to. And each landfill, as we would know with our landfill, has to report, I think it's every 2nd year, on its performance of its landfill, annual performance statement. So they would be available to the public. So that's something we could obtain and provide to Dr Sint and councillors if they so wished. Ultimately, I suppose it's a matter between the EPA and the ONG in terms of how they manage that landfill particularly and how it's regulated.
Thank you, Mr CEO. As there are no other questions to council, that finishes up our public question time. We do have an opportunity for members of the gallery to speak to council through a registration process, and these must be items that are on the agenda for this evening. We have 3 speakers that are speaking to our agenda this evening. The first speaker I'll invite to the lectern is Sue Smedhurst, is the Chair of Destination Gippsland. And Sue, there's a clock which you can see over on the wall there, which will give you a 3-minute time. And then councillors, who just ask you to stay at the lectern, councillors may ask you questions where you'll get further time to answer those. And Sue is speaking on item 9.3.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here this evening, and as it is Remembrance Day, a very special day for this country, I'd like to acknowledge those from this region who lost their lives serving our country, my own family included, and I thank them all very much for their service. I will address the proposed motion directly in a moment, but I think it's important for the Council to have some context and understanding of Destination Gippsland's role. Destination Gippsland is the peak tourism body for this region. We were established in 2008 by the Gippsland Local Government Network and Visit Victoria. We were the first regional tourism body of its kind in Victoria, and we have consistently set the benchmark. We are a not-for-profit public company governed by a skills-based board of directors, all volunteers. Since inception, Destination Gippsland has been highly awarded for its work, and we are honoured in the Victorian Tourism Hall of Fame for marketing excellence. Latrobe, along with the other 5 members of the Gippsland Local Government Network, are financial members of Destination Gippsland. Each contributes an equal amount of $33,000 per year. This goes towards administrative costs, with the balance of our funding coming from the state government, Visit Victoria and local industry participants who support our marketing initiatives. Destination Gippsland's remit covers an area the size of Switzerland, from the edges of Melbourne to the New South Wales border, and as you all know, a stunning, vast and diverse tourism landscape of which Latrobe is one piece. Our role, as chartered by you, the Council, is to drive improvement in the Gippsland tourism sector via the development of tourism infrastructure, industry training and excellence, and regional marketing. Our role is to actively promote the Gippsland region at every opportunity, which we've done to great success. Tourism in Gippsland now employs 13,500 people and supports 3,000 local businesses. In the last year, Gippsland welcomed 7.3 million visitors, a record number, and tourism contributed $1.1 billion to our local economy. Since the inception of Destination Gippsland, visitors to the Latrobe city have increased from 315,000 at its inception to 1.2 million annually. Last year, Destination Gippsland generated more than $15 million worth of just media alone for this region. And if we break that down, in marketing and media alone, for Latrobe City Council, for every dollar that Council has invested in Destination Gippsland, we have returned $75,000 in value. And I'll say that again, for every dollar that Latrobe City Council has invested with us, we've returned $75,000 to the region. That is a stunning return on investment by anyone's measure. I would indulge just for a little bit more time, if that's possible.
Just hold a second, Sue. Councillor,
Move an extension of speaking time.
move in extension of speaker time. Seconder. Councillor Gibson, you have another 3 minutes, Sue.
Thank you, Mayor. Working collaboratively across the region gives us economies of scale not possible for the individual councils to replicate. Among the many achievements of Destination Gippsland this year, there's 2 I'd particularly like to highlight that are relevant to Latrobe City Council. We launched our first dedicated ad campaign for Gippsland in over a decade, our fabulous All Kinds of Wonder campaign, very well received. And significantly, we've completed the Gippsland Destination Management Plan, which is the first tourism blueprint for this region ever. Because we know that tourism is a growth industry, and in a region that is suffering badly from the loss of traditional industries, tourism is the bright light on the horizon. Strong opportunities for Latrobe were identified. And moreover, we've enjoyed a fantastic relationship with Latrobe City Council and the various CEOs, mayors and councillors we've worked with since DGL began, particularly in times of crisis, bushfire and mine fire, when we've worked closely together. Which brings me to the proposed motion, and there's just a few points that I'd like to make, and I'm obviously more than happy to answer questions. Firstly, it is my role as chairman to promote the region and all that it has to offer. Our stunning waterways, world-class natural assets, exquisite paddock-to-plate offerings, and I will sing Gippsland's fabulous story at every opportunity I get. It is vital that we continue to talk up the region's unique beauty and its untapped potential. With respect to that and to this particular motion, that is exactly what I did. When called impromptu just after 7 o'clock by Melbourne's most listened to radio show to comment on a story in the Herald Sun, of which we were unaware, I graciously accepted the opportunity. During that 3-minute interview, I did not endorse or support any position for the mine rehabilitation. I was asked to comment specifically on whether big ideas, not this one specifically, but big ideas were to be applauded, and I naturally commented to the positive, because we are a big, vast, broad region and we need to think big to harness Gippsland's potential. I used the opportunity of this prized airtime to highlight the benefits of our location, our tourism potential and the assets which set us apart from other regions. It is not my role, nor Destination Gippsland's, to take any formal stance or endorse a council position. Our role is to support the best possible outcome for increased visitors and growth to this region, to support the best possible way we can encourage more people to visit Latrobe, to eat, stay and play here. And whether I'm asked about a mine proposal, a bushfire, an airport at Bairnsdale, an algal bloom or the record visitor numbers, I will champion the region's potential at every opportunity. I thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. As always, councillors are welcome to attend any Destination Gippsland meetings, and I thank the councillors and mayors who have attended our meetings throughout the year, and I look forward to continuing the very positive and productive working relationship that we have.
Spot on time, well done.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions that we have for Sue while she's here at the lectern? Councillor Middlemas.
I found that there are only 2 ambush predators in the media. One is ABC Gippsland, which I believe in the last 12 months I've done quite some work towards taming. The other one is 3AW in Melbourne. Both have the habit of ringing at 6:30 in the morning while you're asleep. Is that what happened this time?
Look, yes, they did ring early in the morning, but I certainly wouldn't say, well, I mean, we were ambushed in the sense that we were called for an impromptu interview, yes, but I will always gratefully accept those opportunities to speak, particularly on 3AW. It's taken us a long time to develop a relationship, a good working relationship with that radio station, and to have Gippsland discussed as a tourism destination. Their tendency is to always head to the Great Ocean Road or the Grampians or Geelong or the Bellarine Peninsula. To have them talking about Gippsland in a tourism context is a fantastic opportunity.
I actually didn't want the advertisement, I just wanted to know, did you feel ambushed?
No, I never feel ambushed. I've been in media for 20 years, so I harness every opportunity that we've got to talk it up. And look, you know, that probably wasn't my preferred line of questioning, but I was able to bat that back and talk about all of the good things that the region offers without being specific about anything.
Thanks.
Any other questions, councillors, before we excuse Sue? Councillor White, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just wondering whether, I can't recall, whether you had the opportunity to talk to 3AW about their International Rose Festival that's coming up next weekend.
If they call, I certainly will. I'd certainly love to. We don't necessarily chase media with them. If they call me about any particular issue, and I'm surprised that they haven't called about logging because they do seem to call about everything, but I would certainly be more than happy to champion that. I will say that Destination Gippsland has been championing the Rose Festival. Our whole social media feed last weekend was dedicated to the Rose Festival and packages that Destination Gippsland has done.
Thank you.
Pleasure. The roses are looking beautiful.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Dorothy Dix, for that question. Any other questions that we have of Sue while she's at lectern? No? Okay, then you're excused. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is speaking on item 12.1 is Mel Fife. This is the petition for a footpath on Savages Road in Moe. Mel? Same thing, Mel. You've got 3 minutes. The clock's on the wall. Councillors may ask you questions at the end.
I probably won't take 3 minutes. I'm not used to this sort of thing. Mr Mayor and the councillors, I'd just like to, on behalf of the residents down in Mitchell Grove and the range in Moe, which is growing enormously. We'd like to have a footpath along Savages Road from the roundabout at Mitchell Road over to possibly up to Aldi's bus stop on the racecourse side of the road. As we're getting a lot of more elderly people down there now, and they're going to have scooters and things like that, Mitchell Road alternative route to the city is getting very dangerous now up on the top corner of Mitchell Road. Mitchell Road's, a lot of the trucks come up now Waterloo Road from Trafalgar and vice versa because it's hard getting over the railway crossing. So until the railway crossings, something's ever done about it, they have a problem with trucks, especially double Bs. Sometimes the trailers sitting on the railway line, they can't get through. So they now go through Waterloo Road and they come down Mitchell Road and use Savages Road as a bypass for the city. So it's and a lot of people now are walking that way because it's a shorter route into town. We've got to walk on the road because there's no footpath, obviously, and the grass verge has got a lot of holes, and the grass sometimes is long and slippery and wet. So it's very hard to expect people to walk on that, and you can't obviously can't have a scooter on there. So, and the other thing is, if you go along Mitchell Road and you get across there that blind corner, you go past the racecourse and there's another roundabout near the bowling club, which is also very, very busy. Another blind corner there. You can't see, when you get around the bowling club, you can't see what's coming down Waterloo Road. So, and that is a dangerous alternative as far as we're concerned. Just bear with me for a second. The other thing is now, we hope, I've been onto this a while now, and they said that there'll be a long-term solution. So, but with it growing down there now, we need to get something done as soon as possible. Two of the councillors have been down and had a look at the situation. They agree with it, and hopefully we can get something in the budget next year, or as soon as possible for us if we can. I think that's about it. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
You did very well. Questions, councillor? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, and you did well. A couple of questions for you, please. Can you tell me the number of over 55s that are down there, and there's a development for more? Would you know rough numbers, please?
Rough numbers at the range, which now the entrance from the range will now be in Discovery Drive. So that means there's more people are going to go that way. They're talking about 80 new units there. Obviously, they're over 55s, and so it's not only that. There's the children there with prams and young kids coming from school, and they walk along there. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all I can say for that. Sarah,
No worries. Now, you were saying that you want the path to actually go up around to Aldi with the bus stop there. Is that because the bus stop on Mitchell's Road, you only get one every 2 hours, and it's not conducive to people using public transport? Is that why? Or
Well,
one of the reasons, sorry.
Yeah, but see, a lot of people walk there early in the morning, and if I don't know if the council have done a traffic count along there at all, but it's a very, very busy road now. And because it's 300 metres shorter than going up Mitchell Road, people tend to walk that way to Coles and Kmart. So I don't know what else we can actually say that other than it's just needed badly, as far as I'm concerned.
One more. And you were saying about the corners being so dangerous. Now, being blind corners, but also we have had a fatality already. And do you know how that actually occurred? Was that because of it being a blind corner, or do you know at all?
I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check with the police records
Yeah.
exactly what happened, but the truck did come around the blind corner. Now, what happened from there, I'm not quite sure. So,
Yeah.
but
No
it did. I mean, obviously, it was a fatality there. So,
No worries.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Any other questions from councillors to Mr Fife? No? Then thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Presenting
Thanks
the
very
council.
much. Thank you.
Good on you. Our next speaker is on item 14.1. Mr Simon May, I see Simon in the gallery, is going to be talking about celebrating the 20th anniversary of the sister city relationship with Taizhou. Thanks, Simon. You've got 3 minutes, as per the other speakers, and then questions.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. With respect to the printout that was issued last week, I think it was, the Taizhou Garden for the city of Latrobe. I was wondering, reading through it, how much attention and how much exploration was actually done by anybody on council to identify the Chinese presence in our area. Well, judging from the contents of that issue, I do suspect that not many, because the information that we gleaned, and that is now in the hands of yourselves anyway, that it doesn't seem to gel with us, to be honest. The researching that we carried out over some period of time tells us that the Chinese actually were in the Moe area, and that area covered the whole of Moe because they were building the station, the rail line, and also the gentleman that we've discovered, who is of Chinese descent, he had found artifacts in the pipework of the drain coming out of Moe. Now, I'd like to know, if possible, what such examination was done by yourselves to establish this kind of presence of the Chinese in Moe. I'm not for one moment knocking the Chinese presence. I'm just trying to get you to acknowledge that there was a presence of Chinese
gold miners in Moe.
in that area, because the items found were coins, Chinese coins, that is, of course, coins, and
A large shard of pottery from an opium pot, and also 4 broken opium smoking pipes.
now these items have been handed to the museum in Melbourne,
Yes,
the
so-
Chinese museum.
Simon, we'll just hold there because the timer has gone.
You need.
Yeah, we need more time because
Okay.
Sharon's going to ask some questions, Danny. Okay.
She might.
I might.
She might.
Take.
I think we've got a mover for an extension from Councillor Howe and a second from Councillor Gibson. And just to note that Marilyn has joined at the microphone as well to assist
Yes,
Simon.
I think so. Do you
yeah.
want to take it? You want to?
No.
No, you can speak more.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
What we are concerned about is the fact that since 2006 we have been trying to persuade council to create a Chinese gold miners park or a garden at the Botanical Gardens in Moe, across from the Marrican Creek, because to commemorate that the Chinese miners were in our town and that they are part of our history. It also would be fantastic for tourism where people can walk the Maui Lawn Rail Trail and come off there and have a look at the garden. Now, we have been working very closely with the Maui Historical Society, who's helped us with our research, and also with the Maui Lawn Rail Trail Committee, because they see it as a fantastic opportunity. But the thing is, number one, they had that a simple Chinese commemorative garden there to recognise the Chinese miners in the area is part of our history, and two, is going to be a fantastic tourism opportunity. And we're at a loss and absolutely disappointed and disgusted at the fact that council is talking about this Tai Chi garden at Morwell, when in fact Councillor Tony Zamora, former councillor, he came up with the idea of a Chinese garden because of the information being given by Mr. Michael Singh, who'd found the artefacts. And then it became our project, and we have had numerous meetings over the year with council about this project, and yet you are still talking about supporting this Tai Chi garden when it's our project. So have your Tai Chi garden, but at least give us some money to create a small commemorative garden at the Botanical Gardens. In 2014, we met with Belinda Kolak, who came along, did some designs for it, and she said, Council have told me to tell you that you can have this site when they clear up the old 2 tennis courts. Brilliant. And that's it. But as I said, over the years, 2006, 2014, 2017, 2019, 2015, when Dale went to Taipei as mayor, and he spoke to his counterpart over there in Tom about our project, and they said, fantastic, you send us a photo of the site and we will do the design for you. But again, nothing happened. So you can imagine our frustration, our disappointment to think that Tony's idea has been stolen and our project been stolen. We know that you've been having meetings with these various groups. In fact, Maui Rotary Club decided to put their 2 pence in as well too earlier this year, and I told them to back off. So really, we just want some answers. So if you want to have a Tai Chi garden more, do it. But please, we're asking for some funding to do our little garden at the Maui Botanical Gardens.
We're asking for recognition that the Chinese were in Maui.
Chinese gold miners were in Maui.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that Simon mentioned that in his first. So that's our point where you get to present. Now the councillors will, and maybe we'll be able to flesh out a few things in question time. Are there any questions from councillors? Anyone at all?
Yes, all right.
Councillor Gibson, you've got some questions.
Yeah, I do. All right. Now, this all came about, correct me if I'm wrong, this all came about because the Chinese gentleman, Michael
Singh, yeah.
Yeah, found the Chinese prayer coins.
Yes.
Right, and the opium.
The photographs of those items are in the document.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that started the whole ball rolling.
That's right.
Right, okay. So then Councillor Samora started and wanted to get this project happening.
Yes.
And
based on what Michael had told him and, and that, yeah.
And that had gone, the items have gone down to the
Chinese Museum, and we actually have seen them.
Yep.
Councillor Gibson, it just sounds like a recap at the moment rather than a question.
Okay, we're getting there.
Trying to get my head around some of it too. Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's quite okay. Question.
So from there, you went to the officers and they told you where the site could go. Is that what happened?
Well, that was when we had a meeting. We had a meeting, remember, on 2014, which various people were invited, including yourself.
And Russell North.
Russell North was there. Katrina Cranwell was there. And it was about a week later that Belinda got in touch with them and said, look, can I meet you down there at the gardens? And she said, I'm here to help you. Here we are, I'm showing you the site. That is the site you can have. You've got photos of it.
Yep.
And once they clear these tennis courts, then you can have that for your Chinese garden. And that's the last we heard of it.
But were you given different designs by the officers?
We got nothing in writing, unfortunately.
Okay. I thought you were given some designs
We
from
were
them.
given designs, 3 designs.
Yes.
Well, we picked one because of the most simple one, which was going to be, wouldn't cost much, and it would be vandal proof, because that's another concern.
It's
And
in your
that's why.
document
It's in your
Yeah.
documents.
as well.
It's in the
No
report.
worries. Okay. And
Question?
all right, the investigations, how long have you been investigating this?
About 18 months, 2 years. We didn't do anything until 2017 because we've been pretty busy.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It would have started before then because you've had meetings in 2014. So when did you start
doing
looking
the research
into?
at
Yeah.
the beginning of 2017.
When we located Michael Singh,
When we found Michael Singh again, we tracked him down, and that's when we started doing all the research.
Sorry, there's a bit of a thing because in 2014 you had the meeting, so you would have had some investigations before then with the
Only
meeting.
what Tony was told by Michael
Right,
Singh. Yeah.
okay. No worries. All right. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson, and thanks very much, Simon and Marilyn, for doing that as
thank
well.
you very much for hearing
Great.
us.
Thank you very much.
Much obliged.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
We'll
you for
leave
your
it-
time. So that brings our question time and presentations by public to a close. We move on with the agenda proper. Public participation time is finished. Item 8. Have we got anything? There's no reports in item 8. Mr CEO? No? We're moving on to item 9, which is notices of motion. Item 9.1. Councillor Gibson, I note you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and there is an alt that should jump up.
We have a yes, notice of motion is an alternate recommendation there.
Yep.
So, councillors, this did move around quite late in the email. So, yeah, the notice of motion there is an alternate notice of motion to the notice of motion. Okay, went around what time, Councillor Gibson?
Sorry.
This afternoon? It did make its way around this afternoon.
You ventured into an area which is totally uncharted.
Sorry, what did you say? Yes, that's the motion.
So you're moving this motion here?
Yes.
And yes, we did call it an amended, but it's an alternate because it has some changes. Yes, an alternate. So the mover is Councillor Gibson. Seconder, Councillor O'Callaghan. Do you have any opposition? Do councillors need an opportunity just to read that?
And you need the
There's a
number
point 4 as well, Louise. All right, I think everyone's had a chance to read. Any opposition to this notice of motion? Any speakers to this motion? Councillor Gibson is the mover.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This came about because I was actually at a wake recently, and the lady in question was the daughter of the gentleman who died. Now, she was, of course, quite concerned, but her husband actually had died about 12 months previous, and he had been in a hospice in the Western Districts. And the difference from that to her father-in-law dying was chalk and cheese. Her father-in-law was at a nursing home, and he was dying, and he'd had falls out of the bed. He'd been shuffled to and from the hospital. The hospital, no, bad luck, go back to the nursing home, at which stage he fell out of bed again. And they just aren't designed for people who are dying at all. So they were also telling me the experience they had with the husband and the brother and the husband. There was two ladies, sorry. Now, they were telling me about the experience they had in the Western Districts. Now, the gentleman involved, he had a bit of, what could you call it, dignity in dying, whereas sorry, I'm very tired from the weekend. The father and the father-in-law had no dignity, and I would suggest, rightly or wrongly, that he died premature. He was already dying, yes, but he died premature than what he should have because of all the falling out of bed and the care. Not to say people don't care, but when you actually have a hospice, that's what they're designed for. Now, this experience in the Western Districts, he could have whoever he wanted come. They could sleep the night there. If he wanted to have a beer, if he wanted, no, he would have more of a wine, I would suggest. Chardonnay. And he could do all of that type of thing. Our system, what we have here, is just not set up for that. There is no dignity in dying, and that was what this was all about. You know, we do have quite an area, and we don't have any decent hospice that we can give people who are dying a bit of dignity. So that's what this was about. And then I had my fellow councillor say, what? Now, what about this? So that's why it expanded, but I'll let her speak on that. So that's how it started. Oh no, I'm happy.
I think Councillor Gibson was giving a segue to Councillor O'Callaghan, who was the seconder. Councillor O'Callaghan.
Prepared earlier, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you to Councillor Gibson for allowing me to add to her notice of motion, and to Councillor Middlemiss for his indulgence. In relation to this, the additional points that are made are around the opportunity to meet with the Minister directly and local stakeholder representatives. Also to loop in our great crew on the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan around the developing of a report to provide some guidance to Council in relation not only to the hospice discussion, as Councillor Gibson has raised, which is an important and valuable one, but palliative care and dying in place of choice. We'd also like to see consideration of service and system collaboration in relation to workforce planning and overarching approaches to public health, which are all considerations within the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, and also the role that Council can take in terms of collaboration and inclusive approaches of government at all levels, health services and our community, who are, of course, the most important stakeholder in relation to this conversation. I'd like to acknowledge all of the workers in this space. They've been working long and hard, sometimes under extremely difficult circumstances, and also the families who've given freely and openly of their end-of-life experiences with their family members in relation to care. The Palliative Care Consortium, the Positive Active Ageing Forum that we recently held, and two palliative care forums, one for Gippsland and one for Latrobe, have undertaken a broad range of consultation. One of those forums was led by the Latrobe Health Advocate. I'd like to thank Jane Anderson for her generosity in the provision of information and consideration of all elements relating to palliative care across Latrobe. The Advocate was very generous in providing some feedback in relation to this conversation. Her priorities were considering end-of-life palliative care priorities for the community who were looking to have hospice care. Recently, she provided views to the Minister's Office in relation to the experience and aspiration of our community. She's also got 12 recommendations about end-of-life palliative care services in Latrobe and some recommendations that will cover a range of aspects. These are dying in a place of choice, systems working in harmony, workforce, our public health approach, and strong leadership and community engagement via strong and contemporary governance. The advocate does make a recommendation in relation to hospice, but it's not a standalone recommendation, and there are a range of factors to be taken into account in terms of resourcing for the broader palliative care system. There's no single or shared definition of hospice, and there are a range of options that could be provided in terms of when, where and how that hospice is provided and takes place. The good thing is that the range of feedback given by our community was consistent with the Victorian and federal government's frameworks in relation to palliative care. So we're on the right track, and I thank Councillor Gibson for putting this NOM in the public domain for us to discuss. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor O'Callaghan. Are there any other speakers to this motion, either for or against?
Question, Mr Mayor.
Question?
Can we have the first page of the notice of motion up, because this is the first I've seen it. Thank you.
Very practical question. Thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Harriman.
We'll do our best, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Gibson for putting this up. As you're probably aware, this cut's very close. Last 5 years, I've lost 4 family members. And I can vouch for the great support that a palliative care service provides. My brother went through the Barwon Health Service in Geelong, receiving both palliative care when he needed it and end-of-life care. My brother was in there for a number of weeks, and as Councillor Gibson has stated, he was probably just a little bit better than staying at the Hilton. His wife was able to stay with him. It was a queen-size bed. He was able to stock the not-so-small bar fridge, almost a full-size fridge, with quite a good selection of white wines and the odd red, and I do believe there was the odd bottle of scotch and a port taken in there as well. The care provided was one nurse between 2 rooms. The room provided was enough to take family, friends. It had a lounge area, it had a tabled seating area, and it also had an outdoor area that my brother could go and sit in and be wheeled into in later life. My brother died with dignity, which was not the case with my mother, my father, and my best friend down here. They suffered pain. They suffered a lack of dignity. They died earlier than what they should have. And yes, they're going to die. They had cancer and they were dying. But I saw the dignity, the care, and the lack of pain my brother went through, and having seen what happened to my best mate and my father afterwards is just heartbreaking. The palliative care volunteers we have down here are absolutely awesome. The palliative care workers we have are absolutely awesome. When you ring at 1:30 in the morning, they're there within half an hour, but you know they're leaving somebody else that needs their care as well to come and provide the care you need. And it's just not right for the people down here. This is a service that is needed. It is a service, as Kelly and Sharon have both said, gives people a bit of pride or a bit of dignity at the last days, but it's also about pain management. There is no dignity having somebody stuffed that full of opioids that they can't communicate with family around them, because that's the only way we know to manage pain. There's no dignity in somebody being stuck in their home with family trying to provide that support and burning out family members. So, to councillors, I fully recommend this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Harriman. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? No other speakers. Councillor Gibson, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This actually came about at Councillor Harriman's father's wake that the conversation went down. So I thank you for having the courage to speak. But that's what it's about. It's letting people die with dignity. And I would suggest, and he can nod or shake his head, that the trauma he went through with his father and others compared to his brother are chalk and cheese. If we let our people have a hospice and they can die with dignity, it's not just helping them, it's helping the family and friends and their loved ones. We wouldn't treat an animal like this, but we're treating our fellow humans like this. So I would strongly urge not just my fellow councillors to support this, but I would strongly encourage the government to come on board with this. I did have a conversation with our health advocate, Jane Anderson, and she said, actually, that's along the lines that I'm going anyway. So I would strongly encourage the government to let our people die with dignity. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. As we have had speakers, we need to put this to the vote. All in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We're moving on to our next item on the agenda, which is a notice of motion. Councillor Harriman.
Happy to move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Howe, as a seconder. Any opposition? Councillor Harriman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just as a bit of information for councillors about why we need to make sure that we actually have trains running during this 2-week period. Two of the biggest events down this way are Farm World and Oz Timber. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they run back to back, week after week, which was organised because both take up most of the accommodation available throughout the region. The problem being that V-Line is intending to do rail works at that stage, which means we'll be running on buses. Now, just to give you an idea, Mr Mayor, last year at Oz Timber, we had 7,500 people turn up. At this stage, they're already looking at over 8,000. Last year was 4 years ago. We're already looking at over 8,000 at Oz Timber for the week this time. The accommodation in Gippsland cannot keep up with that amount of people, so a lot are staying in Melbourne and they're coming down by train. We're talking last Oz Timber, it's estimated that over 1,000 people travelled by train on the Friday and the Saturday and the Sunday, backwards and forwards to Melbourne at various times. I don't think our buses are quite going to cope. So what we're asking is that the council, through the Mayor, write to the Minister for Public Transport, the Honourable Melissa Horne, and request that during that time trains are run and that V-Line be made aware that there might be an excess demand through Farm World and through Oz Timber, and that any works are rescheduled outside that time. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Councillor Howe, your seconder.
Yeah, thank you. This is extremely important. What we're trying to do is establish ourselves as the event capital of country Victoria. Oz Timber, we had it 4 years ago. We ran it so well that they've come to us again. What we can't do is have them sitting on the Monash for 4 hours each way. We won't have a chance of getting again, and the damage to our reputation as an events centre, which just probably would take us years to recover from. So very, very important that we get together on this and send the letter to the Minister for Public Transport.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? No? Councillor Harriman, would you like to close? No? All right. As we have had speakers, we need to put it to the vote. All in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Minimus, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Move to item 9.3 in our notices of motion. Do we have a mover here?
Yep, looks like it's me again, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harriman is a mover. Do we have a seconder for this notice of motion? Councillor Middlemas as a seconder. Any opposition to this? 1, 2, yes, 3. There's some opposition, so we will have some discussion about it. Councillor Harriman, as the mover, you have your first chance to talk.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I do thank the Chair of Destination Gippsland for coming tonight and speaking. A lot of this is based on angst that has been put to me by ratepayers. As a number of people are well aware, I've dealt with a number of ex-Hazelwood employees, and their frustration that what they see is a bad result, getting airplay and being associated with Destination Gippsland. I take Ms Smithhurst's view that it was a phone call early in the morning, that she didn't support the new lake option, which is at odds with council. What has become more obvious over the weekend is a word that has offended a number of former workers at Hazelwood and some that I'm still dealing with and talk with at your lawn, where the term eyesore was used in relation to the mines, and in particular Hazelwood being an eyesore sitting on the edge of Morwell, and what a horrible place to have it. I know that wasn't the words that Destination Gippsland's chair used, but she did agree with it being an eyesore, and that's one of the things that started me on this. It's one of the things that has got me probably upset and put this forward. The problem being, I don't see, and neither do a number of people that I've dealt with that work there, see that mine as an eyesore. They see it as a place of work. They see it as a place granting them employment. They see it as a place that gave them dignity of having a job. A number of people that are under the pump at your lawn, with a number of our inner city friends pushing for it to be closed as soon as possible, feel very, very similar. And I think there's probably a little bit of a disconnect between this council's view, or at least some of our ratepayers' view, of what the mines represent, and maybe that in Destination Gippsland. So this calls, the bottom one formally extends an invite to meet with the Chair of Destination Gippsland to discuss mine rehabilitation. I know this is probably going to upset a few people, and probably already has. I know it's already, the comments that were made and the article in the Herald Sun upset a hell of a lot of people, because generally when I was talking to the guys that I still see, that I still catch up with most days, that have had trouble getting work after Hazelwood closed, it's one of the things they mentioned all the time. I can understand a phone call early in the morning. I'll finish off in the next 3. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Harriman?
I've got another 3 minutes and...
Can't add new information into a close. No. All right, moved by Councillor Middlemas and seconded by Councillor Gibson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, Mr Mayor, that if there was a proposal to go ahead, or if Bass Coast Shire had a proposal to go ahead on Phillip Island about the penguins, I'm fairly certain most people at Destination Gippsland would know about it. I know if there was a proposal to go ahead at Wilson's Prom, most people at Destination Gippsland would know about it. They would know the council's view. We know the council's view. I think everyone's aware of the council's view in East Gippsland when it comes to jetties and the lakes. What I'm trying to get through to here is that Destination Gippsland understands a very important factor to us, and it's an important factor to the whole of the region, is what happens to those mines and where they sit and the value they hold, and the view that's held by this council in that area, because they are going to have a major impact on what happens to Latrobe City for a number of years to come. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Thank you for the extension to councillors. Councillor Middlemas, you were the seconder if you'd like to speak. Reserve. Are there any other councillors that'd like to speak for or against this notice of motion? Councillor McFarlane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In speaking against the motion, I'm just disappointed that this matter has had to be placed in the public domain. When the way that I see it, and I think it's been commented on tonight, it was some possibly innocent comments made by the Chair of Destination Gippsland when the Lake Como concept was floated and actively pursued by the media. I'm not going to say much more, but I thought we as a council wanted to work in cooperation with our community partners. I just don't think motions like this do any good for our or our partners' images. I believe we want to be working in an open and honest environment rather than destroying relationships. And I think motions like this only destroy relationships, which take a lot of rebuilding. So I cannot support it.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Is there any other speakers for or against this motion? Yes, Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief, as always. I think that, Mr Mayor, that I have to concur with the remarks of Councillor McFarlane in relation to this particular matter. If we had some concerns in relation to some comments that might have been made at any arena, that we should be taking the opportunity to have a conversation with that organisation or individuals associated with that organisation to understand the basis. And I think that, as we've heard, and I acknowledge and appreciate the fact that the Chair of Destination Gippsland has been here this evening to give an update, if you like, and of what Destination Gippsland has been doing across the whole of the Gippsland region, but also, more importantly, what it's been doing in terms of the impact that it's been having in relation to Latrobe City. I've heard the mention of the fact, I think it was for every dollar that's been spent, we're getting, what is it, $75 back, I think it $75,000
back, yeah.
back in relation to the work of the Destination Gippsland. And I think that we have had a good working relationship, and I think that no relationship ever goes perfectly, and if there's room for improvement, let's do it. But I think this strategy that's been suggested here through this motion, I can't accept at all, and so I won't be supporting it.
Thanks, Councillor White. Are there any other speakers for this motion or against this motion?
Can I
Councillor
foreshadow, please?
You can foreshadow at any time. What would you like to foreshadow? Great. Okay. Councillor Callaghan, no? Councillor Law. All right, Councillor Law.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, just certainly like to concur with my last two councillors' words. I think we work hard to build relationships with our other organisations that do a lot of community-based volunteer work in our community. Destination Gippsland is naturally one of the peer leaders of our community, and they are at the point where they're trying to do the best for the whole of the region. And I think just these type of slight comments, okay, they might be misguided to a certain degree, but the intent is purely to advance the whole community and region. So I believe it's a non-event, and I think with Councillor White that we should certainly look at having these discussions behind closed doors rather than open public. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Law. Are there any other speakers to this motion? Councillor O'Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think further to my colleagues' comments, I think it's important to acknowledge Councillor Harriman speaking to this from the perspective of constituents who have brought to his attention a level of concern, and I think in speaking to not making this personal, I also don't want to make it personal in relation to Councillor Harriman. I'm all for having conversations where we need to be clear and concise. I do think, however, that the suggestion of withholding funds pending opportunity for further discussion is inconsistent with our approach to doing business, and not necessarily one that will build a level of rapport or shared collaboration with this or potentially other relationships. I think we also need to be a little more proactive in the way we engage with our stakeholders so that we know that they do understand quite clearly what our priorities and expectations are. So there's some learnings in that for us, and making sure that if we do have decisions or directions or strategies, that we're going out of our way to be clear and concise with our partner agencies and other stakeholders around our direction, our intent, so that if they are assisting us in terms of engaging with media or in other forums, they actually have the opportunity to speak clearly and concisely in relation to shared and agreed principles about what we're all trying to achieve. I was concerned that this did seem a little personal, having been challenged personally in the public domain on matters which pertain to council in the past. I know it's not a nice feeling. I know that Sue and her team at Destination Gippsland are doing a great deal of work off a broad geographic area with a great level of diversity and significant competitive influence across the population base. I congratulate them for that. I don't believe this will have in any way caused any concern for our relationship, and I hope that what we can do is move now to a space where we can all have a very worthwhile conversation around what we'd like to achieve in Latrobe and how we can collectively and collaboratively work together in relation not only to the mines, but other areas, including event attraction in Latrobe City as well. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor O'Callaghan. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? No? Councillor Minimus, you reserved as a seconder?
Bit of a storm in a teacup, this. The problem is we have a close relationship, we're supposed to have a close relationship with Destination Gippsland, but they are not or do not appear to be aware of the concern in which we hold the mine rehabilitation issue. Another half inch in, I think we come to the biggest item on the agenda, which is just that. I'm concerned that Destination Gippsland would not be aware of the difficulties that Council has been having with this process all along. Now, Sue asked me to listen to the radio. I hadn't bothered to listen to it a couple of times. There's only one point in it where I have any problems, and it's when the remark is made, bring it on. We don't want it brought on. I think, I can't say that, there'll be a motion shortly, but I don't think we want it brought on. My solution to all this is very simple, is for our officers to liaise with Destination Gippsland so we are quite clear in the position we are taking on this. It doesn't help us in any way whatsoever for any organisation in Gippsland to be talking positively about the proposal, as will come to the debate here. But as for shooting people, things like that, I'm not into that kind of thing. I just like to sit down in a room with Sue and work this out. But we'll see how the motion goes.
Thanks, Councillor Minimus. No other speakers. Councillor Herring, would you like to close?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank the other councillors for their views. As I keep saying, that point number 3 is formally extend an invite to meet with the Chair of Destination Gippsland to discuss mine rehabilitation. As to the point of keeping this indoors, if I have a number of my constituents and ratepayers come to me that are angry over something, I'm not going to take it behind closed doors. If they want to fight in public, that's what I'm going to give them because they are my stakeholders. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. So I've had speakers to the motion for and against. The show of hands for to support this notice of motion. Councillor Middlemas. Councillor Harriman. Against the motion. Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Gibson, thank you. Councillor Law. Councillor Howe. Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. So the motion has been lost, but there was a foreshadow. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Foreshadowed motion is point 1. Set up a meeting with Destination Gippsland as soon as possible. And
Can I just, as you're sitting there, Councillor Gibson, is there a few points in there, or is it okay, not worthwhile adjourning for 5 minutes? No? It is worthwhile adjourning. Just for the governance officers, they are typing on the go, so we can adjourn for 5 minutes while we...
oh, all right, I'm coming.
We might do that, councillors. We'll just have an adjournment for 5 minutes, have a comfort break or a cup of tea, and we'll be back in 5 minutes' time. It's 7:11. Just look to Aldo to make sure that we're, thank you. So welcome back at 7:16. That was a 5-minute break and well timed, everyone. Foreshadowed motions. Councillor Gibson.
I'd like to move that motion, please.
We have a mover in Councillor Gibson and a seconder in Councillor Middlemiss. For those who can't read the screen, it says to organise a meeting with Destination Gippsland as soon as possible and hold regular meetings with Destination Gippsland on a quarterly basis or as required. Mover. Is there any opposition to this motion? No. Speakers, Councillor Gibson? Okay, spoken. Councillor Middlemiss? Okay. No speakers, no opposition. We'll take that as carried, that foreshadowed motion at 9.3. We're moving on, councillors. We're going to 9.4, walking path of Mitchell's Road.
Mr Mayor, it's come to my attention that my mum, although 87, has actually signed this petition for a footpath. Well, I know she's not going to be able to walk it. So for 9.4 and 12.1, I think I'll declare a possible conflict, indirect conflict.
Indirect interest. All right, thank you, Councillor Law. We'll have you leave the chamber. Mum's not going to storm the barricades on us, but... All right. Councillor Gibson, you are moving 9.4.
Yes, please. Oh, sorry, 2 words added in. Second last line at the end. Savages Road to Aldi. So after to Aldi, or, and put or. Yep.
Or the appropriate connection to the Moe CBD. All right, that's not altering the motion in any way, so it's just an amendment. Moving that.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
We have a seconder in Councillor Harriman. Mover. Second. Any opposition to this notice of motion? No opposition. Councillor Gibson, would you like to speak to it?
Just quickly. Thank you. All right. As much as I might joke about just quickly, this isn't a joking matter, and they're gone, but that's all right. This is all about safety for our vulnerable. There are elderly there. You've got 80 new over 25 residences being built at that site. Quarentia. Over 55. No. No worries. So you have them. You also have kids down in Mitchell Grove. It's a new estate. You have those who are disabled. There's a gentleman there, and his mother is getting older, and she's worried that he is not going to be able to be independent, because as it stands at the moment, you have to go up Mitchell's Road. Now, Mitchell's Road, you've already had a fatality on the corner. It is a bad corner, and that's just the way it is. It is a bad corner, and then, yes, if you go along that road past the race course, the race club, you get to that corner, and that again, yes, we can have the do something about being able to cross it, but it is a bad corner. It is a dangerous corner. So as much as you can allow the scooters to actually get off the pavement, it's still a bad corner. It is, I wouldn't want to put anyone in that position. Now, if you go along Savages Road, you have a couple of options. You can walk on the road, because on the side of the road there are is great drains, open drains. So you can't just walk on the verge. To walk on the verge, you're up in the grass area, and unless it's mowed to an inch within its life, come summer, you're going to have snakes. Come winter, it's slippery, and you're not going to be able to have people in a scooter go up there. You just can't do it, and it's dangerous for them. Where they showed me the sign, and it's on different footpaths. That went quick.
Move an extension, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harriman. Councillor Middles seconding.
Thanks, gents.
Another 3 minutes.
Sorry, and you just lost my train of thought. Damn. Well, you do have a drain on each side, and you also have snakes. Yeah, got snakes. It was after the snakes, I was thinking. Pardon? See what they do to me? All right. And it's just dangerous. Now, I wouldn't want to put my loved ones in that position because it's dangerous for them. You've got a mother there who is worried that it's going to come a time soon, hopefully not for a while, but it's coming, that she can't drive her son anymore. So what's he going to do? She's going to worry herself sick that he's got to go up Mitchell's Road, and there's already been a fatality with a scooter there. So what's she going to do? She's going to blame herself if anything happens to him. You know, no, we can't do this. So what I'm asking is for the officers to prepare a report with some concepts, some options that we can look at, and then it will have to go into a budget item, and that's fine. But give us something that they can actually be safe, because as it stands, they're just not safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Harriman, you were seconding.
Very, very briefly, Mr Mayor. Basically what we're looking at doing is getting some costs and plans to counter a safety issue that is occurring in Moe, Newborough, and couldn't agree with more with Councillor Gibson. It's something we need to look at and something we need to do.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Are there any other speakers to this notice of motion, for or against? No other speakers? Councillor Gibson, you'd like to close? No? All right. Then we will take it to the vote then, as we've had speakers. Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and Councillor Clancy is me. That has passed unanimously. If the officers could return Councillor Law to the chamber. Councillor Law comes back in. This is an item referred to Council for this meeting for consideration. There was a petition put to us at the last Council meeting for the disposal of silage wrap, and this has led to this motion. Councillor Harriman.
Mr Mayor.
Certainly can. The officers have that alternate motion. Yes. Are there any questions of councillors before we move forward? No? Everyone's had a chance to read this? Great. Councillor Harriman, we have a mover of the motion. Do I have a seconder for it?
I'll second it.
Councillor White is the seconder. Do I have any opposition at all to this? Councillor Middlemas, opposed. Councillor Howe is opposed. You can absolutely reserve your right to... Councillor Harriman, as the mover, you have a chance to speak.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. At the moment, we have holding at our waste facility $2,500 worth of silage wrap. It's envisaged that if we open it up for 2 months, which would be December and January, it's estimated that we may get a similar amount or a similar cost to council to deal with it. The reason I'm saying we need to open it up for waste and recycling and allow it to be brought in is the general problem with it at the moment is that a lot of it is being burnt, which is obviously not the outcome we're after. I also want to work with other councils and the Resource Recovery Gippsland to investigate ways of recycling or repurposing this silage wrap. It has been done in the past, but unfortunately the contractor that was doing it decided to pull out at the last minute. Working with other councillors and with the Resource Recovery Group will give us the option of getting a region-wide outcome for it. We know that that's what Wellington and East Gippsland are already doing with their farmers and looking at it. It's a way of working with them. I understand that Ball Ball is looking at it as well because it is a huge issue there. So it's basically give it 2 months, get in what's out in the paddocks, get it cleared off the farms. Let's not have fires being lit or accidentally or on purpose with all the silage, or it being buried in holes to become a problem later on with leachate issues. Let's get it in. It's not going to be a huge cost on council. We're talking a couple of $1,000s. Bring it in and come up with a strategy with other councils and resource recovery to find an alternate use for it, and to get an education program going out there telling farmers not to burn it, to bring it in so that we can actually deal with it. I know in other countries they've actually come up with new silage wrap that's can be used as feed as well, and a lot of countries are actually using the silage wrap as a recycled plastic product. So it just gives us an idea, rather than just saying no to the and not going any further with it. Let's spend 2 months, bring in what we can. If it costs us a couple of $1,000s, it's a way of supporting our farmers who are doing it fairly tough at the moment, and it brings us on par with some of our fellow councils in the region. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Councillor White, you are the seconder. You have an opportunity to speak.
I'll reserve.
Thank you. Reserving. Are there any other councillors who'd like to speak for or against this motion? Councillor Middlemas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got no opposition whatsoever to what Councillor Harriman is proposing. Let's all the Gippsland councils get together, see if we can find a solution with the Waste Recovery Group. What I am concerned about is if we start paying a subsidy for just a couple of months, we'll create an impression that, yes, we're prepared to subsidise it. Now, are we? Are we prepared to use ratepayers' money? It's fair to say that farmers get a considerable discount already on their rates out of the ratepayers' pocket. And why on this particular product would we take on the cost? It's a farmer's input cost, and they should be handling these things. Let's by all means look for an alternative. I've looked for an alternative in the past. And Regional Waste Management Group, the predecessor of this mob, when I was chair, we found a solution. The farmers let us down. The farmers couldn't bring in uncontaminated product. And the people receiving it in Melbourne, in the end, gave up in annoyance because the farmers wouldn't cooperate. Now, let's get the farmers on board, let's get them cooperating, let's see if we can find a market, but let's not lead them into the false impression that we'll subsidise them. Quite happy to do everything Councillor Harriman's proposing, except I don't believe we should be paying for 2 months because we'll give the impression we're going to take that liability on forever. Why we should is beyond me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Middlemas. Are there any other speakers for or against the motion? Councillor Howe?
Against. Thanks, Mr Mayor. I agree 100%. Councillor Middlemas said. Happy to support 2, 3 and 4. The silage wrap disposal is a cost for their business. It's not something that we should take on and pay for on behalf of our ratepayers. If we take this step, what's next? Retail's doing it tough. Do we take their rubbish? The mechanics are doing it tough. Do we take their waste oil? I just don't think it's a path we should go down. But like I said, happy to support the rest of the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Councillor Gibson.
Can I foreshadow, please?
Yes, you can foreshadow, but it is worthwhile noting that this is an alternate motion and the only difference between the original motion and this motion is point 1. So if this is lost, we will be then debating the original motion. Okay, just worthwhile noting. Any other speakers? No? Sorry? You're looking at me oddly?
Oh, just look at the CEO.
No, the motion is then put as a foreshadowed motion.
Yes, okay, great. Councillor White, you've reserved the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was doing a Councillor Middlemas. No, seconding it for discussion. And so I must say that I'm getting what's the word, sort of, I can see both sides of the story here, and I hear what you're saying, Councillor Middlemas, and I think that's got, and Councillor Howe, there's got quite a bit of merit attached to it. The other thing that I suppose that does concern me as well with it all is that, in fact, the timing, if we were going to do this, that December, January, is possibly not the ideal time for doing it, because of the focus is on hay season and not about putting the stuff out. And but the other thing that I particularly was, which is not mentioned here, but I'll comment on it anyway, and that is that I was thinking to myself that maybe there's an opportunity here, and I suppose it can be latched on to the working with other Gippsland councils and Resource Recovery Gippsland in regard to working with Federation University in regard to determining another kind of product that is going to be able to be more readily recycled or used for other purposes, that in a different from what it is today. I know it's a problem, and it really does need to be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor White. Are there any other speakers to this motion? For or against? No? Then Councillor Harriman, you have a chance to close.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will point out to my fellow councillors that we have received a large sum of money from the federal government to help with the drought. We've also been told via newspapers that that sum is about to be repeated to be able to help our communities during the drought, and I thought this might just be a way of helping our communities during the drought. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harriman. As we've had speakers, we'll put this to the vote. All in favour of the alternate motion that's been put here? Raise your hands.
So it's me.
Councillor Harriman, on your Pat Malone. And all those against? Yes, thank you, Councillor Middlemas. Very tentative. Councillor Law, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Howe, thank you, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. And as the original motion wasn't put, thank you very much, that Councillor Gibson did foreshadow that we would.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is the original with an addition on point 2. The first line has work with other Gippsland councils and Resource Recovery Gippsland and Fed Uni.
To investigate the opportunities, yep. And Federation University.
The Carbon Research Institute.
Yes. Okay, as the officers have just put that there? Yep, okay. So Councillor Gibson moving that motion. Councillor Howe as a seconder. Do I have any opposition? No speakers? Councillor Gibson? No? No speakers? Then we'll take that through as unanimous. Thank you very much, Councillor Gibson, for foreshadowing that. We have no correspondence at item 11 of our agenda, so we go to 12, which is 12.1, presentation of petitions. Just before we move, Councillor Law, you've already indicated in this meeting that you have an indirect conflict there because of your mother's property. And 12.1, Councillor Gibson.
Although, question through you to our CEO. given my notice of motion that's just been passed, how does that impede this, please?
I think the CEO may be on top of that.
So, actually, Mr Mayor, so in terms of
No.
the previous motion,
Because of your notice of motion.
effectively saying the same things, aren't they? So,
Except that's got a footpath, whereas mine's looking at
so it might be simpler through you, Mr Mayor, either to align the two or so we don't get confusion in terms of the previous decision, so that it aligns with this, if you're looking to have the same information come back.
So if we're aligning the two, how would you change that?
At item 2, rather than request a report, because you've already done that in this meeting, you might just change the words to and refer to 9.4 in this item,
As
because that's already called for your report with your LD in there as well.
I was suggesting, Mr Mayor, maybe just copy from the previous resolution the same wording, so just so they align, so there isn't confusion about what we're actually investigating for you. So,
Don't want 2 reports, do we?
no, not particularly. So we should be able to just copy that from the previous. Yep. And insert that if you're willing to make that amendment.
Do you need to make a reference to it?
No, so if it's exactly the same,
Yep.
just so we're not duplicating, doing a different report.
Great.
What we're just discussing is the first paragraph says cement. Next one says all options.
Yep.
It should say concrete.
So just in dot point 1 of 12.1, as required.
So,
Just remove.
Yeah.
oh, right.
Yep. So a suggestion of cement, but then looking at all options. Yep. Yep.
Unless the engineer beside me points out cement is a great dust.
It's a constituent product of.
Yes, that's right. Yes. You'd like-
Yes, I'm moving that.
Okay. Thank you. We have a mover in Councillor Gibson and a seconder in Councillor McFarlane. Any opposition? Councillor Gibson, would you like to speak to this?
I think it's really all been said.
Councillor McFarlane, would you like to speak to this? Okay. As we haven't had any speakers and there's no opposition, we'll pass that unanimously. The officer's gone to get Councillor Law. Thank you, councillors. We have no reports in the office of the Chief Executive at 13. So we move to 14. 14.1, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the sister city's relationship with Taizhou for a Taizhou garden in Latrobe. Yep. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm moving an alt in point 2 to be what the hell is it called? Maui Botanical Gardens, sorry. Saved by the bell.
All right, so we're putting an alternate motion forward on this motion. And then,
Point 2, is that
yes,
replacing?
Kernot Hall, Lake Morwell to Botanic Gardens, Maui. No, thanks. All right. Within the surrounds.
And the last line in point 2.
Yep, there we go. For the botanists in the room, are we saying botanical or botanic? Botanical, thank you. I always thought it was botanic, but let's not split hairs over this one. All right, so we have an alternate motion put forward with Botanical Gardens Moe. We have a seconder, so Councillor Gibson, I've just moved to our alternate. Councillor Gibson is our mover. Councillor Howe is our seconder. Is there any opposition? There is opposition. Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas. So speakers, Councillor Gibson, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a long, drawn-out process and something I wish didn't come to the chamber as it is. There are anomalies in the report. There are anomalies in minutes, and this does not put council in the best position at all. As I say, I wish it didn't come to the chamber, but that so be it. Now, this goes back over a long period of time. There has been a group who have been, well, it started from a councillor, and this has been occurring since 2006. Not until 2014 was I brought into the event, and at that event that was with our officers. It was with RDV, I believe. It was also with Russell North and myself and the actual groups. Now, at that time, our officers were on board and they even told them where to have it because they changed the sites. Because where they were going to have it was actually not wise with... Sorry, he's eating his cupcake. With vandalism. So it wasn't the wisest place. So our officers came up with a different site. They also came up, as you heard, and the lady in question has had a panic attack, so she's had medication. So she wasn't thinking and speaking as clear as she could, which is sad. But they came up with 3 different designs. Now, from there, that's where it gets very interesting because that came from our officers. Now, from there, I actually, the following year, the Mayor of the day went to our sister city in China, and I said to him, based on what our officers had said, can you speak to the... Gee, that's going quick tonight.
Quick 3 minutes. Councillor
It'll be
Gibson.
a long meeting,
Councillor,
Mr Mayor. Extension if we could.
seconded by Councillor Minimus, moved by Councillor Harriman. Councillor Gibson, you have another 3.
Shut up. So from there, I asked him if he could ask our sister city if they would like to help out with the garden, because the previous year I had been and opened the Chinese garden over in China, where it was part of us, our garden, but they decided where they wanted it. So I opened that with them, and he went and asked the question. And He can tell you, if he wishes, how that went down. From there, it stalled inside the building. For what reason? I don't know, and that's where the concerns started. There have been numerous letters sent to different councillors and administration, and that hasn't been dealt with. It has actually come up at the International Relations Committee. Mind you, that's not in the minutes, because the question was asked of the different ones around the table, and it was about 4 meetings ago. I could find out the exact dates where they wanted it. The different options were put to them, and they were asked where they wanted it. And our International Relations Committee said Maui. That's not in the minutes. That's wrong. You do not put or don't put different things in minutes. That's wrong. So from there, it's all stalled. Then we find out that the Chinese were brought over and showed all these sites. How has all of this been happening? It is wrong. Governance, where's that? This is the type of thing that IBAC and the inspectorate love. And this is what we've got in front of us now. This is wrong. You do not treat a group who is putting all their time and effort into a project and hijack it like this. So I'm asking my fellow councillors to do the right thing. There are problems with this report. There are problems with minutes. Are you going to actually stand by good governance or not? Because I will.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My reasoning is a little bit more basic than Councillor Gibson, so I'll just run through them. 3 main reasons why do I believe it should be based in Maui rather than Kernett Hall. First one is Immigration Park is currently down there. It takes up probably 3 sides, 2.5 sides of the lake. Fantastic. It's a fantastic development there. I think if you put another theme or another park in there, all it's going to do in the long term is prevent both of the 2 parks to reaching their full potential. If we can move one to Maui, Immigration Park will continue to grow and expand. I reckon they're going to have great ideas, the committee down there, to continue on with that. Second reason is it'll give each major town a different sort of park, different open space. We'll have Victory Park in Traralgon, we'll have Immigration Park in Morwell, and then we'll have the Chinese Garden in Maui. Third reason is that it will give ownership and it will give passion to the one in Maui. If you look at all our open spaces, the ones that work are the ones that have got a passionate committee behind it that want to drive it. And Immigration Parks is a great example. You give it to Maui, the Maui people will embrace it, they'll have the passion, not only will they get it up and going, but they'll continue to develop it and make sure that it's going to be an icon of Maui for the years to come. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Is there anyone else that would like to speak for or against the motion? Is there a speaker? Councillor McFarlane.
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, and I suppose with Mr and Mrs May being here tonight, and they made it quite clear they were quite happy for a Taijao garden somewhere, but they wanted the Maui Botanic Garden to acknowledge, as they talked about, a Chinese presence in the town. So I think the issue that I'm trying to see here is we're looking at a garden for acknowledging the anniversary of our connection with Taijao, and that doesn't stop the council at some stage in the near future or the future from supporting the Make Maui Glow project with the development of their parkland. From my information, the most recent documentation that I saw was from Taizhou, where they, after inspecting all the sites, had identified Kernot Hall Lake as their preferred site, so that's their choice, and I'm certainly not flying the flag for Maul, but I do see with Immigration Park on that site, with the cherry trees that we have on that site, acknowledging our sister city relationship with Takasago, that the Taizhou proposal probably fits quite nicely. But I do reiterate that doesn't take away the Make Maui Glow proposal to have some gardens recognising a Chinese presence at Maui. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? Councillor Middlemas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor McFarlane's pretty much covered my views on this. If I could just add a couple of quick points. I was told many years ago, and I have to defer to Councillor White around this because I've not had much involvement with the sister city system since I've been a councillor, and it's a long time. Councillor White's had all that experience, but I was told that the original relationship with China came to us with Trogan City, and the relationship with Japan came to us from Maul City. So I'm not really sure where the Maui connection comes in. Certainly there were Cantonese, Guangdong people from that area who were mining north of Maui, and they would have left artefacts around there. It was interesting, as you're aware, I was doing a lot of research recently on the location of the former Loyang railway station, and in talking to some history buffs from Rosedale of all places, they said to me, look up Loyang in Google. And when you look up Loyang in Google, it isn't Aboriginal for eel, it's the former royal capital of China. And they said how it got named Loyang was there was a Chinese market garden just below Loyang, it's on the Princess Highway, which fed vegetables to Trogan in the early days, so there's a connection there. But Councillor Gibson has put to me, while the period I was mayor, her position that she's just explained in detail here. I asked the officers to produce every piece of paper they could find on this matter, and I can find no resolution of council about where this garden should go. There may have been other agreements, I won't deny that, but certainly there is no resolution of this council. So to the point where I am, the people from our Chinese sister city have come to us and said we like water, and we think the best site is the Kernot Hall site. I'd like to see more detail of what that would look like. That's the area they've chosen. I'm comfortable with that area, but I certainly take the point that Mr and Mrs May had. Certainly we should have a botanical, in our botanical gardens, a Japanese feature and a Chinese feature over at Maui. But at the moment, I'm inclined to the view put by the officers. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Middlemas. Are there any other speakers for or against the motion? In any order? Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I rise to indicate that I might be supporting the alternate recommendation here tonight. And as Councillor Middlemas did indicate, I've had a continuing role, if you like, for many, many years on our International Relations Committee, and because of I believe in the principles of what the sister cities can offer in relation to this municipality, in terms of the people of this municipality, particularly our young people, and also the opportunity for economic development over time. And so certainly over that period of time, there's been a strong relationship being developed with the City of Taizhou, and in terms of the interface between these two important municipalities. And for me, in all of the time that I've been involved with it, obviously all the discussions that have been undertaken through the International Relations Committee have been documented and been subject to confirmation at subsequent meetings. And as far as I'm concerned, this particular matter this is the first time that this has come before the council for consideration and deliberation, and that's why I'm viewing it.
Thanks, Councillor White. Are there any other speakers for the motion or against the motion? Councillor Harriman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will speak. Councillor Gibson did mention I was the mayor that went to China and spoke with the Chinese mayor of Taizhou. Before I left, I spoke to the officers because Councillor Gibson had said there was a request to have a Chinese garden in Maui. I asked the officers to fill me in on what that was about. They said, in their opinion, that there was a design already done to go into the botanical gardens in Maui, but they would prefer to have some input from Taizhou. On meeting with the Mayor of Taizhou, from that information from the officers, I asked them would they be amenable to helping design a garden to go into Maui Botanical Gardens. The answer was yes. From my point of view, that was the view of the officers back then. I was simply passing on a request that there'd been a request from the community. My understanding, the officers, there'd been a long-standing push from a previous council and the community to have a garden, a Chinese garden, put in there. The request was made to Taizhou. Taizhou agreed to put it in. I'd also just like to point out, this is irrelevant to where it sits, but the Australian, or the Latrobe City Garden in Taizhou, we had no input into where it went. We were told what sort of design they wanted, and we sent somebody over to design around what they requested. Seems fair to me that we place not too much weight on what Taizhou wants, because really they gave no weight to what we wanted. And I think it's important to understand that this is not going to be a case of, oh, they're going to get their noses out of joint. This is going to be a case of us treating them in a manner in which they accepted us to be treated. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? No. Then Councillor Gibson, you have the opportunity to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On a number of points, my fellow councillor just said about noses out of joints. Well, in the design that the Chinese have come to us with, now my fellow councillor next door was saying it impacts with the Japanese part. That's what he told me with the bridge. Now, if that's the case, you can't put the design that they've given us there at Kunot Lake, because then you're going to, we just went last week, a few of us around this table, just went to the hydrogen plant updates, if you like, with the Japanese. They're spending hundreds of millions in our municipality. So it's going to impact on their area and their noses won't be out of joints. I would question that their noses would be out of joint, and rightly so. And if it's not going there, our Don De Fabrizio was actually told, because he had questions with this, and our officer said, no, it's all right, it's going there. You don't have to put in any opposition to it. But if it's not going where the Chinese have said, which will impact on the Japanese, then where's it going? Is it or isn't it going to impact on the immigration park? We don't know. So has he been lied to or not? Because we don't know. There are so many holes in this. Now, as for Mr and Mrs May happy with whatever at Maui, I would suggest if you put them back there and said, do you want this project there? They will tell you point blank, that's exactly what they have been speaking about all along. They have put years into this project. Now, as for Taizhou, You're right. We didn't have a say where it went. We didn't have that. Now, they have said to us, they were shown all these sites by our officers, and yes, they said, oh, well, wouldn't mind that one. But at the last meeting we had with them, they were asked point blank, where do you want it? And they said, it's up to you. So are we going to do the right thing by the Japanese? Are we going to do the right thing by Immigration Park? And are we going to do the right thing by our constituents that have been spending all this time on this project?
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for your closing. So we have an alternate motion in front of us to vote on. All those in favour of, please put your hand up. Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor O'Callaghan. All those against? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor White and myself. The motion is carried 5-4. Thank you, councillors. We move on to 14.2 in our agenda, which is the Latrobe Regional Gallery Da Vinci Machines exhibition. Councillor McFarlane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the adoption of the proposed resolution.
The resolution as it is the recommendation resolution in the agenda. Do I have a seconder?
We have an alternate motion. The alternate is on this.
We do. Councillor.
So
Councillors McFarlane's right to move the original as well. So, do you have a seconder for Councillor McFarlane, or did someone want to put an alternate forward? This is the original. Your second.
Hang on.
That's the original. What was there was the alternate, and the original has been moved. Not that one.
The original motion has been moved and seconded.
We didn't get quick enough.
Opposition, Councillor O'Callaghan. Let me get my...
That's the alternate.
I was hoping for a quick meeting, councillors. Seconder and Councillor Howe. Opposition, Councillor O'Callaghan.
Yes.
Would you like to speak to this? Councillor McFarlane, you're the mover.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This proposal has come up through our newly appointed Tourism and Major Events Advisory Committee, which includes Councillor Howe as Chair, Councillor Gibson, Councillor White and myself. And it got quite a lot of discussion at that meeting, which beyond those four councillors includes a number of community representatives. We believe the exhibition has a lot of appeal, will be well received by a community, and in looking at the budget, which we always have to do, the proposal at $10 per adult, ensuring that children and students are at no charge.
That's what you call
aims for a near balanced budget based on around 10,000 attendees. However, as a responsible advisory committee, we've looked at a worst case scenario, which is attendance of 5,000, and we would, through this recommendation, be proposing that council would provide up to 67,000 to deliver the exhibition. On a personal note, I believe $10 is a reasonable charge for adults. It's less than going to see a movie, and it's certainly less I think the same as going to a normal footy game, and less than going to a final. I think if we lessen the charge from $10, I just think it potentially weakens the value of the exhibition. And I think in this day and age, and I believe we have some processes in our system that accommodate someone in dire straits. However, I think the $10 is a reasonable charge. But as I say, this the whole proposal has come up through the TAMAC committee, has had a fair consideration, and I believe we should support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. We had a seconder in Councillor Howe. Would you like to speak? Reserve the right to speak. We had some opposition, so are there any other speakers? Councillor O'Callaghan, you
Thank you,
seem
Mr
to
Mayor.
be adjusting.
Just to speak to this in relation, and apologies, Mr Mayor, some confusion at the front end of the conversation. I wanted to speak in opposition to this because I do believe the $10 ticket price is a barrier to participation. We certainly learnt through the Magritte exhibition that there were members of our community who, for any number of reasons, experience a level of financial hardship or disadvantage. I'm not prepared to see members of our community excluded from participation in this or other events of its type within our gallery when it is generally a space that is open and inclusive and available. I do acknowledge Councillor McFarlane spoke to mechanisms by which we could reduce or waiver. Those would be discretionary. They are not necessarily identified in a formal process. So I would just prefer that a further reduced admission price would give consideration to a contribution by residents. Wouldn't be quite so cost prohibitive for those who would like to attend. Unfortunately, we don't have that formal mechanism of consideration for access for those who, for any number of reasons, wouldn't be able to contribute financially. And it's just quite simple. I don't want to see anybody in any way significantly disadvantaged. I do, however, recognise there is a cost to the ratepayer in terms of provision of this particular activity at the gallery, and that the committee has given it appropriate and due consideration. I just think on the balance of what the community has been through in recent times, this is one of those opportunities that we can allow a little leverage in our budget to allow as many people as possible access to the event and do so in a way that won't in any way prohibit participation by any member of our community. So I would foreshadow, in the event that this motion is not successful, another motion which would see a reduction ever so slightly in the ticket cost. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor O'Callaghan. Are there any other speakers to this motion? Nope. Councillor Howe, you reserve the right to speak.
I'll just say a few words. Thanks, Mr Mayor. I don't think the Magrittes, firstly the Magrittes display we had over there, I don't think that was a matter of cost rather than nobody really knew who he was or cared. On the other hand...
There might be some debate of whether people cared.
Good to hear from the artistic community.
On the other hand, Da Vinci, well known, all ages, all walks of life. This did go through our Tourism and Major Events Committee, which I am the chair of. That's got half a dozen public people on it. They all thought that the $10 per adult was a fair charge. That means that a family of 5 or 4, like 2 adults, 2 kids, 3 kids, they will get in to see it for $20. It's great value. Students and kids under 16s are free. I think we've got a good compromise between keeping the value of the exhibition and opening up to as wide a group as possible to come and see it.
Thanks, Councillor Howe. Are there any other speakers at all? No? Then, Councillor McFarlane, would you like to close?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, I think we're all in agreement that the Da Vinci exhibition is a great exhibition to have. So it really comes down to the pricing structure, and I suppose if you asked any one of us what that dollar should be, we'll all come up with different dollars. So I'm proposing the motion that suggests $10 for adults, no charge for children, and no charge for students, students attending as part of a school group. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. As we've had speakers, we will put this motion to the vote. All those in favour of this motion? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor White. All those against? Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Harriman, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. The motion has been lost, but with a foreshadow as a new motion. Councillor O'Callaghan.
So, Mr Mayor, I'm winging this at this point.
Wing away.
Foreshadowing the aforementioned alternate, which has the... Is that correct? I'm foreshadowing. Yeah, with the reduced price of $5 for adults, children, and that's pretty much it.
So the only difference between this...
Sorry? Oh, sorry, and the allocated funding changes.
Yes, and the allocated funding between 67 and 72,000. Yep.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. We have a mover in Councillor O'Callaghan, and seconder in Councillor Harriman. Any opposition? No, we're all being very congenial. Speakers. Councillor O'Callaghan.
On the basis of expedience, Mr Mayor, and given we've discussed it, happy just to put it straight to the vote.
Councillor Harriman. Any other speakers? No? All right, as there's no speakers and there's been no debate, we'll pass that as unanimous vote. Thank you, councillors. That has been passed. We're moving on to 14.3, which is a draft submission to the Latrobe Valley Regional Rehabilitation Strategy. 14.3, do I have a mover for this motion, for this recommendation? 147. Thank you, Councillor Middlemas. We have a mover.
Happy to second it, Mr Mayor.
Seconder and Councillor Harriman. Do we have any opposition to this draft submission or to this resolution at this stage? No? All right, Councillor Middlemas, you have the floor. There is no gallery. But, I think he's a... No. All right, there's no speakers. Councillor Harriman, you were the second. You have an opportunity to speak. No? All right. As we have had no speakers, did anyone else want to speak? I should just ask that. No? As we've had no speakers and there was no opposition, we will pass that unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. We are at 14.4, which is the Joint Council response to the City of Sydney's Climate Emergency Declaration. I am going to have a guess without looking up.
Yep.
Councillor Harriman.
Got it in one.
You are the mover, Councillor Harriman. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gibson, thank you. Do I have any opposition to this resolution? No? Councillor Harriman, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm actually going to take councillors just on page 206, which is the guiding principles. Principle 1 is promoting economic diversification and utilisation of carbon from coal. The undersigned recognise that carbon's resources present a valuable and significant resource which provides opportunities to manufacture diverse, high-value products and applications across industries and sectors. A long-term commitment to research and investment in low-emission technology and innovation is required to realise the inherent value of regional carbon resources within the increasingly carbon-constrained environment. This needs to be supported by a strong government position and a clear policy statement in relation to the future development of coal. Mr Mayor, what we're looking at is those councils that have coal production within their shires coming together, and the indications we already have are that there's very strong support for that group forming, to come together to see and to show and to put an alternative point of view that there are uses for coal, that coal in thermal generation, power generation, can be low emissions. It has already been proven it can be done lower than gas. With carbon utilisation, we can get close to zero emissions. That carbon and CO2 actually have a value and a use. and that we come together as a group, those 8 other shires, 8 other councils, under 3 guiding principles, the first one being the one I just read out. Now, this is about taking joint action. We've probably, as councils, been sitting back and taking a lot of hits on a regular basis from inner city councils, particularly within Melbourne and Sydney, from a lot of groups taking climate emergency claims. And I think it was just about time that the alternative voice and some of the facts actually get put back out there. As a group, we need to stand up, and this council has taken the lead in that, and actually say that there is uses for coal, that there are positives for being a coal industry, that there are uses for coal in thermal production. And Mr Mayor, I would like to point out that it does mention here that this is a discussion with Australian power stations and it was brought about by Clover Moore, the Mayor of Sydney, holding the signatures of 11,000 eminent, and I use that word, her words, eminent scientists in support of climate action. Now, there's been somebody actually go through those 11,000. I'll be very quick, Mr Mayor.
We can give you another 3 minutes, Councillor
Won't need
Middlemas.
3 minutes,
and
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gibson for an extension.
Thank you, councillors. I'll wind it up very quickly, Mr Mayor. As I was saying, some people have started actually going through those eminent scientists, those 11,000 eminent scientists, and there's been some outstanding scientists in there. A Professor M. Mouse from the University of DL, which I think stands for Disneyland. Absolutely brilliant chap. Saw him in Fantasia, wonderful. A Professor Albus Dumbledore, who, as we all know, was probably the leading headmaster ever at Hogwarts. Did an outstanding job in fighting he who shall not be named. And amazingly, even after being killed, was able to come back and sign this form. Absolutely fantastic. And I hope there's no kids looking because there was a Professor C. Linguist in there as well. They're just 3 of the eminent scientists that have actually signed this form. I make that point, Mr Mayor, in that there's a lot of misinformation going around. What we're aiming to achieve here and to put out is facts, not based on what somebody says, not based on waving a piece of paper around and saying, peace in our time, but based on facts of the value of coal, of carbon, of utilisation, and what benefit it can provide to not only this community, but the 8 other shires that are interested in it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Councillor Gibson, you second and you have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm happy to support this. I like to deal with the facts. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of information out there that just isn't true. And I get very frustrated when an incident happened. There was a meeting held by this group and they met at Kernot Hall and they got all the school kids in. Now, if you go under the layers, it was through Environment Victoria and they were pushing the anti-coal message. They are utilising our kids with not all the facts. Because I asked the question, I said, okay, can you tell me, are you against coal if there's 0 emissions? Yes, was the answer. And I said, okay, why? So then it was, oh, well, you're digging up the Koori land. And I said, but hang on, we've been working with the Kooris around here, maybe not as much as we should have, and that will change into the future, which is great. But they don't have an issue with it. And they said, oh, well, hang on, but we're going to do this across Australia and we're going to do this. And they're just pushing their barrow. get the facts out there so the average person can actually make an informed decision. No one's saying there isn't climate change. They're not saying that, but put the facts out. You can utilise a key resource that we have here. It doesn't have to be one way. There are a whole host of ways we can utilise it, but put the facts out. Now, I heard today there's a young kid who's actually going around the schools at the moment. He dropped out of school, but he's going around suggesting to the fellow students, take time off school, go and rally, go and protest. You know, what the hell are we doing here? We need the facts out there where proper scientists are actually putting the information out there so we can have an informed decision. So happy for this to go down, and I would love to see the facts out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Is there any other speakers to this motion? Councillor Middlemas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Certainly I would have to support this motion simply on the basis that any move to have a clearer understanding of the future role of coal must help us, must help Australia. What I'm disturbed about is that governments are starting to jump on this coal is bad. I can remember walking at the students' demonstration a couple of weeks back. I walked out of a building in Melbourne to be confronted by a young kid with a very large sign, "Coal is death." And I thought, my God, how will we ever defeat that argument? But if we can get the facts out there that there are low emissions, in fact, councillors were, led by yourself, at turning of the first site of the new hydrogen plant or trial plant only recently, which is a zero emissions proposition. The emissions will be taken and captured and stored underground. So it's a case of getting some clarity around the debate. One of the organisations we can talk about in Environment Victoria, Friends of the Earth, all those kind of groups, but I'll add another group to it, the Latrobe Valley Authority. Latrobe Valley Authority is paying for the launch of a book on an alternative energy future. I don't think that helps our region at all if we're talking about low emissions and things like that. So I support this motion on the basis that hopefully it'll introduce some sanity into the debate. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Middlemas. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? Either order. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support this particular motion. I think that one of the things that really... let me start again. Climate change has certainly been a feature of our landscape for ever, and continues to be a ongoing changing climate that we have to, as a people on this planet, we have to adapt to as time goes by. And so far as our coal resources are concerned, and I suppose the thing that really irks me about all this is, in fact, I saw an item just the other day again there where there's an article in the media and talking about the adverse effects of coal, and there they showed these couple of cooling towers with all this steam coming out of it, and sort of inferring that that was the big bad odour, which it's not. And for goodness sake, it really makes me very annoyed. But certainly the idea that coal has many uses going forward into the future, as has been mentioned by Councillor Middlemas and others in relation to the coal to hydrogen project, for example, and as we know, it's got huge potential. And but there's also it needs to be understood that the CO2 emissions, which seems to be the key element that really is concerning the community more broadly. It's not only produced by power stations, but significantly, like power stations produce, as I understand it, something like about 25% fossil fuels. And when we talk about fossil fuels, we're not just talking about coal, we're talking about oil, we're talking about gas. That CO2 that's being emitted in the atmosphere is not just coming from power stations, it's coming from trucks, cars, and industrial processes. And beef cattle, maybe even. But it's really what I'm trying to say is that there are many ways in which CO2 is being emitted in the atmosphere, not just through coal. And it's unfair that coal gets the branded or pigeonholed in that regard. And so, but the other thing I want to say is that, carbon capture utilisation is the way of the future as far as I'm concerned, and turning the CO2 from a liability into an asset. And certainly that is something that's being pursued in Germany and other places right now, that where products are being produced as a result of capturing the CO2 and through a catalytic process, converting the product that they create into them for the purpose of manufacturing bed mattresses and synthetic playing surfaces and the like. And even the latest is that they're being able to manufacture clothing fibre. Thank you.
Oh, extending it.
Oh, that's what I'm saying, yeah, okay.
Councillor Gibson. Councillor Harriman for an extension of 3 minutes.
I
Councillor
don't think
White.
I'll need that long, Mr Mayor.
You were just up to mattresses.
It was just up to mattresses. Yeah, so I try to, that's the other thing, as I said, the manufacture of synthetic playing surfaces, which is a new dimension, but and also, as I mentioned before, the latest development is to be able to convert the product using CO2 into clothing fibre. And so there are countless opportunities, in my view, that ought to be able to be explored, and it really, what's the word I'm looking for? It really, I struggle to understand why the universities of Australia are not giving greater focus, emphasis and attention to this idea of research into exploiting the CO2 and, as I said before, turning it from a liability into an asset that can be for the benefit of the planet. And so that's clearly the message that I want to get through here, that in terms of the ongoing future, that we see that coal in all its forms, whether it's going to be used, as I said, for power generation, whether it's going to be used through the Healy projects, or whether it's going to be used for hydrogen projects, and whether it's going to be used for AdBlue projects, all those sorts of things. There are opportunities there, and we need to be prepared to accept and say that coal is not on the nose, but is an opportunity for the future.
Thank you, Councillor White. Are there any other speakers to this motion? No, Councillor Harriman, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have to correct myself. I said there was 8 other councils. That's 8 in Queensland.
Oh.
That does include the new proposed high efficiency, low emissions coal-fired power station in the Whitsundays going into Collinsville. So there's 8 in Queensland. There's 5 more in New South Wales, 5 other councils, Latrobe City, and obviously there's the Shire of Collie in WA, which has 3 power stations and has a coal mine that produces coal to the industry. Mr Mayor, just to finish, this is about those of us, those councils with coal who see a future in it, as Darryl and Graham and a number of other councillors have mentioned tonight, and looking at how to use it. Now, was mentioned here tonight that we've just laid the keystone out at the hydrogen plant, the coal to hydrogen plant at Loy Yang. What wasn't also mentioned was that we have operating a business within a couple of drop punts from here, Omnia, who are producing a high-grade fertiliser out of our coal that's being sold worldwide, that we have scientists and a development crew that have used brown coal from this region to produce carbon fibre. The list goes on and on. And I just wonder when people think of all these products that are getting produced, whether there's a disconnect between coal producing a lot of good products and their view that there's always a CO2 emission. What we need to understand is that we're getting more and more technologies where we're using some storage, but we're getting more and more technologies that are using carbon capture and utilisation. And that changes the ballpark. A lot of people say, oh, coal was the horse and cart. I say, no, 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 no. Most cars were developed by coach builders. And it's a matter of taking what we're doing with coal 20, 30 years ago and bringing it into the current day and turning it into cars from a horse and cart. And that's what technology is all about. That's what this proposal is all about, that we work with those other councils, that we put the facts out there, that we show what's being done with coal, we show the benefits it has to the community. Just in closing, Mr Mayor, 7 years ago we hit peak production for superphosphate. It's on the decline, which means a lot of our fertilisers are going to start to lose their effectiveness because it's a base product in it, which means food supply is going to start to drop off, food productivity is going to start to drop off, which means we need an alternative. Coal is that alternative. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Thank you to the speakers. As we've had speakers, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. That is passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We're moving on to asset and presentation section of our agenda. The recreational needs assessment, the review of the assessment matrix is 15.1. Do I have a mover? Councillor Law, happy to move. And Councillor Howe as a seconder. Do I have any opposition? Councillor Middlemas as an opposition. Councillor Law.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think this is just one of these matrices where it's always going to be revolving and there's always going to be some other points that are going to be added at some point in time to try and get it to the absolute best we can. I think it's the intent of the matrix is to give a fair and outcome to everyone that actually is part of this system, and I think that's all its intention to do, is to try and equalise it across the whole of Latrobe City for all those groups, and I think we're just trying to get the best outcome. And I think this gets as close as we can at this point in time, but as I said, it can always have a tweak at some point to make it a fraction better, but I see this as quite okay for what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Seconder and Councillor Howe. Reserved, right to see. Councillor Middlemas, you are opposed. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Law just gave my speech, so I won't say much. All I'm doing, I'm not really opposing this, all I'm doing is flag one point. In a recent conversation with a local netball club, they pointed, a netball football club by the way, they pointed out that their sole facility was an ATCO hut and that they trained under 6 candle power light. And the question they put to me is how we ever get our numbers up. The matrix we've got here is dependent, the better the more numbers you got, the better you get. And Councillor Law's hit the nail right on the head with what the point I was going to make. It must remain dynamic. We must be able to tweak it because this club, with proper change rooms and proper lights, probably double their members, but they haven't, and so they're stuck spinning their wheels. And the only point I wanted to make is we must keep our eye on this. We must be aware that tweaks will be constant, and I just second virtually what Councillor Law has said, but that was from opposition.
You can speak from whatever point you'd like.
Thank you.
It's the vote that counts in the end. Any other speakers to this motion that's before us? Councillor Howe, you reserve the right to speak. You don't have to speak. Okay, thank you. Councillor Law, would you like to close?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, so we've had speakers. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Councillor Middlemiss, very slowly with your hand. Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor Callaghan and myself. That's been passed unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Item 15.2 is a community infrastructure loan review. Councillor Howe, note you.
Move an alt, please.
You'd like to put an alternate motion forward? This is the one that's on the screen. And you're seconding that? Councillor Gibson is seconding the alternate motion? Alternate? The difference between the two is worthwhile noting is 7.5 for one project and 2.5 for the other, rather than 10 for one project. All right. Is there any opposition to the alternate motion? I'll put just Councillor Howe. Councillor Gibson? No opposition? Councillor Howe, would you like to speak?
Yes, please. Thanks, Mr Mayor. The reason I'm putting up this alternate motion is that I believe that upgrading Kernett Hall, which is Latrobe City's #1 indoor event space, should be our council's #1 priority. For $2.5 million will be enough to be able to get stage 1 of the refurb, which will include the northern and western facades upgraded. Internal upgrades will include the electrical works, mechanical services work, internal fire services, new disabled access to the stage level, new kitchen access to foyer, work to the existing toilets, new women's toilets, a new fire escape door to the chair store. We have based our whole events and tourism strategy around trying to bring events, trying to create events, trying to make events bigger, but our #1 indoor event space is falling apart around us. So I think it's important that we get that developed. There's a lot of activation down at that space at the moment with TAFE and with the Innovation Hub. They'll use it. It'll be turning from what we've got now as a liability. It'll turn into an asset which we can use. Our public and companies and groups that come to our city for events can use it. So that'll still leave $7.5 million to go towards the Moe redevelopment. They're already getting the car park upgraded through another source, so we should get most of stage 2 done if we get the full funding. If not, we should get a fair swag of the Moe development done. So just leave a little bit for the rest of stage 2 and stage 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Gibson, you are the seconder. Your opportunity to speak.
Yes, please. I'm happy to support this. Finally would be, if I had to say one word, it'd be finally. So we could get stage 2 done. We've been waiting, oh God, blimey, Teddy, a long time for stage 2. So I'm happy to support this. I understand about Kernett Hall, but as I say, just finally.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Are there any other councillors that would like to speak either for or against the motion? If you raise your hand, you'll buy something. Right. Councillor Howe, would you like to close?
Just briefly. As Gippsland's only regional city, I believe it's important that Latrobe City does have a fully functional indoor event space such as Kernett Hall. So.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. As we've had speakers, we'll put the motion to the vote. Councillors, Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemiss, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. That alternate motion has been passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. At 15.3, the appointment of councillors to fill vacancies on the project reference group. Thank you, Councillor Middlemiss to mover and Councillor McFarlane as a seconder. Thank you very much. Is there any opposition to this? No opposition? Sorry? No, sorry. Mr. Drum? Just as we're just talking about replacing councillor Law, we just remove councillor Law from the room as the advice from our governance team. We have a mover in Councillor Middlemas and a seconder in Councillor McFarlane. Would either of you like to speak? No? Anyone else would like to speak to this motion? If there are no speakers, we will pass that unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We can bring Councillor Law back in. Moving on to 16.1. This is the Latrobe City Council Disability Action Plan 2018 to 21 Year 1 actions and the Year 2 priorities. Have a mover for this, Councillor Callaghan.
Happy to move, Mr Mayor.
Do I have a seconder for this resolution? Thank you, Councillor White. Do I have any opposition? Councillor O'Callaghan, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Many of my colleagues will be very familiar with our Disability Action Plan. We adopted our plan of 2018-21 in August of 2018. We've also held a range of forums and co-design processes to review the Year 1 actions, so what we've achieved to date as part of the Disability Action Plan, and also look towards setting priorities for Year 2. We're very grateful to the support we've had from a range of community members, service provider representatives and also our council staff, who under the guidance of Kate Kerslake as our GM have ensured that we've been able to provide a wide range of opportunities for discussion and consideration of a broad range of factors that inform our work. We're also very pleased to be able to have a broad range of staff from Latrobe City participate in the forum. We took an approach that was quite inclusive of areas of our business that would not normally be engaged in our community services work, and we found that that was very successful. We're very grateful to the team members who did come along, offered their expertise, but also provided a range of support to our community members as well. We will continue through our plan to work with our local community to further enhance Year 2 and also get some future direction on those things that are working successfully and those things which need a little more activity, renewed focus and potential partnership across a range of organisations and service providers. In Year 1, we reflected on a lot of the work that was undertaken through our International Day of People with a Disability and the event that we held. We've updated a lot of our communication boards across our service centres to ensure information is accessible. We've also had a Disability Access Grant program with a level of success around applications so that we can provide upgrade and support. We've had a range of activities across our services in terms of ensuring greater access and opportunity, and many of our residents will have seen an increased number of accessible parking spaces across the municipality in recent times as well. Our changing places facilities more broadly available, and we provided more information to our community about what they are for and how they are utilised and why they are so important. And we've had a much broader base of communication with community around footpaths, lighting upgrades, public toilets, grab rails, and a range of other mobility assistance issues. We have, of course, engaged with our community around the impact of the National Disability Insurance Scheme and how we are providing service. And in Year 2, we'll be looking to improved access for information, I'll spin it, increased employment opportunity for people with disability, community opportunities around transport, and most importantly, there was a significant level of interest against preventing violence against women with a disability. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Callaghan. And in your defence, the clock did disappear from the screen, so yes, usually your timing's impeccable. Councillor White, you've seconded? Okay. Are there any other speakers to this motion? Councillor O'Callaghan, would you like to close? You're out of breath. All right, then we'll put it to the vote. Councillors, all those in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and Councillor Clancy. That has passed unanimously. This is 16.2 is the Draft Cultural Diversity Action Plan for 2020 to 2021. Councillor White is moving. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McFarlane, thank you very much. Off mic. Do I have any opposition to this? No. Councillor White, would you like to speak to this?
Very briefly, again, Mr Mayor. This particular document which is intended to operate for the next 4 years is all about access and equity, about responsiveness and about leadership. And as you can see from the executive summary, there's been a extensive process undertaken in terms of getting this document to this point, and the draft document was released to the public from the 6th of August to the 17th of September to gain feedback from the community in regard to the content of the draft, and we received 10 submissions as a result, and the majority of which of the content has been able to be incorporated and embraced into this final version of the document. So it's really about trying to make sure that it's identifying the aspirations of this council, but more particularly the aspirations of our community in this particular area of concern. And as I said, the overall aim of the plan, as it says in the final dot point there, is to acknowledge diversity and build inclusivity, and this has been able to be demonstrated in the final draft, and should allow council to make achievements in this area over the next 4 years. So the submissions received really did talk about which have been able to be the content of which have been able to be embraced by this document, really making sure that the measures are more able to clearly understood and are appreciated. Inclusion of relevant statistics and background information has been added, and inclusion of new actions to support storytelling and practical supports that have been able to be exploited in terms of supporting this particular sector of our community. So this particular document concentrates on fewer but more strategic actions that go beyond celebrating and raising awareness to creating meaningful change. It centres on capturing areas beyond Council's existing culturally inclusive day-to-day functions and responsibilities through improving access and equity, being more responsive as an organisation, and strengthening our own leadership and culturally diverse leadership in our community. And so, on the basis of hopefully acceptance by this council this evening, the plan is for the information contained in the plan to be shared through a number of channels, including the council's website, Facebook page, and through direct contact with local ethnic social groups, etc., agencies and organisations who have come with that culturally diverse background. So I commend this document to you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor McFarlane, you were a seconder.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's all been said.
It has been said quite eloquently. Are there any other speakers to this motion? No other speakers. Councillor White, would you like to close? No? All right, then we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. Thank you very much, councillors. We're moving on to... Yes, just note that Councillor Middlemas is just leaving the room for a quick minute. We're moving on to 17.1, which is the financial report. Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Do I have a seconder for this? Councillor Howe, thank you so much, Councillor. Councillor McFarlane, would you like to speak to this?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, it's the quarterly report for the first 3 months of this financial year, which shows that that we're tracking very well, operating within the parameters of the adopted budget. So we look forward to the remaining 9 months, tracking along the same way with a final result positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Howe. Are there any other speakers in for or against this motion? No, if there's no other speakers, though we have had speakers, we do need to put this to the vote. So all in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor Callaghan and myself, and in the absence of Councillor Middlemas who can't vote. On that, we're moving on to 17.2, which is the tabling of Assembly of Councillor records. Do I have a mover for this resolution? Councillor Gibson. And a seconder? Councillor Law. Thank you. Any opposition? No opposition. Councillor Gibson, would you like to speak? Councillor Law? No. Anyone else would like to speak to this motion? No. If there are no speakers and no opposition, we will pass that unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. We are moving on to 18 in our agenda, which is urgent business. If there is any urgent business that needs to come forward at this time, Councillor Harriman.
Mr Mayor, I do have a piece of urgent business that I would like to put forward.
Yes.
So I'd like to move that it be admitted for discussion.
So, councillors, we have done this before, but what we first need to do is we need to have a mover and a seconder to open this topic to council for urgent business and then listen to the proposed resolution. So we have a mover in Councillor Harriman and a seconder in Councillor Middlemas. So, Councillor Harriman, I'll ask you if there any opposition for this for a start. Is there anyone that opposes? Which is a bit hard because we don't know what it's about yet. But Councillor Harriman, I'll give you the opportunity to speak and to speak to the to being admitted, yes, rather than the resolution itself. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There was a release from the government that was made on Thursday, which made it too late for this to be accepted as a notice of motion. It has a huge impact on not only Latrobe City, but the whole of the Gippsland region. It has a huge impact on a lot of businesses, a lot of mum and dad employers, a lot of contractors and a lot of workers that reside within Latrobe City. It is not an issue that we will have much time to wait until our next council meeting for a notice of motion to go forward. It is something that needs to be addressed rather urgently. There are calls within the community for this to be addressed rather urgently as well, and I think as a matter of course, seeing as it affects so many of our ratepayers, that it's something that council needs to jump on as quickly as possible. Therefore, I would ask my fellow councillors that it be admitted into a debate, that we can actually admit it into urgent business and have a further debate on it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. So we're discussing the admitting the notice of motion around the Victorian Forestry Plan is the topic that we're talking about. Councillor Middlemas, you were seconder. Okay, thank you. Are there any opposition or any other speakers to admitting this as urgent business to this council meeting? No opposition? No other speakers? We put it to the vote for admitting this into this council meeting as urgent business. Those in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor Callaghan and myself. So unanimously put that through. So we've admitted that as urgent business.
I will move the motion if I may, Mr Mayor.
Certainly can. The motion, we'll see if we can put that up on the screen.
Councillors should have a
Yes.
I do apologise. It's altered a little bit and it's become well wordsmithed, if I may add. Absolutely brilliantly wordsmithed from an outstanding officer.
Great.
CEO wrote it for me, gave him the general gist and...
Someone did his homework for him. So, councillors, we have the proposed resolution that's been admitted as urgent business, that in relation to the state government's recent announcement regarding the Timber Industry Council seeks support from GLGN members' councils to express disappointment relating to the decision to close the native timber industry in Victoria. Has everyone got a copy of that? I won't continue to read it if everyone's got a copy. That's what's before us at the moment. Okay, so we have a mover in Councillor Harriman Do I have a seconder for this proposed resolution? Councillor Law is a seconder. Do I have any opposition to this resolution?
Well, probably a question that I'd like to come up
Through the debate?
if I can ask my question.
You can ask your question.
Concern I have.
Yep.
Is point 2.
Okay, so you're looking for some validity on whether the statements, what they are and whether they were correct or not?
Yeah, and they may well be, but at this area, we don't have.
Okay. You're probably going to have to take the one on notice, Mr CEO. No.
If I could address it during my...
Yes, well, we might. So we've had a question, and that just sets the frame for the discussion. And Councillor Middlemas, are you suggesting that you would foreshadow an alternate that didn't have point 2?
I don't foresee this being lost, so that you can say I foreshadow.
I'm just giving you the option there if you wanted that. Okay, so any questions, Councillor McFarlane, you happy with the... Yep. Is there any other questions before Councillor Harriman? No? All right, Councillor Harriman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Just to answer point 2 first, the comment made with the release of this that logging in old growth forests would stop immediately, 180,000 hectares of old growth forest. Victoria hasn't logged old growth forest as it is known within the industry and as is legally known for about 30 years. The timber they're referring to is 70 years old, but it was harvested 75 years ago and replanted over a 5-year period, having been harvested 60 years before that and replanted before that. So this is the third harvesting of trees that were actually burnt. It's a section of land that was actually burnt out in a major bushfire in the 1800s. So it's not old growth forest. Old growth forest generally refers to trees that have never been harvested or that are part of a forest that have majoritarily not been harvested. This is an entire area that was burnt out and had no trees of any value left and was replanted by foresters, grown for 60 years, harvested, and now has been grown for another 70 years. That is the incorrect statement, and it's a highly emotive point within the timber industry that they actually don't harvest old growth forests. To put it in perspective, there is 6% of Victoria's forests available for harvesting, ever. Every year, 0.04% of that is harvested. So to put it in perspective, that's 4 trees out of every 10,000 regrowth trees that have been harvested and replanted, regrowth trees, 4 out of 10,000 are harvested in 1 year. Over a 60-year cycle, that means 240 trees out of 10,000 are harvested. It is a minute amount, but it is high-value timber. And that's part of the reason that there's a disappointment with the closure of the native timber industry. When you're talking value of timber, if you look at a pine tree out here, generally, in about 15 years from being planted, I'll go through, 10 to 15 years, I'll go through and thin them, and that'll be turned into pulp. That's a couple of dollars a tonne. After 25 years, some will be thinned, they'll be harvested, some will go to posts, and a lot will be, which they might get $20 to $30 a tonne for the posts, and a lot will then go to pulp. With the native timber, with a mountain ash that is 60 years old, going to a furniture specialist in Melbourne or Sydney or overseas, thanks, sorry.
Maybe.
There.
Just before you extend Councillor Harriman, before we extend Councillor Harriman, we have just hit the 9 o'clock mark, and according to the local law, I need to just extend over the 3 hours. So we need a majority vote. Move extension, Councillor Middlemas, seconded by Councillor Gibson. All in favour of extending our time over 3 hours?
8-1.
That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Back to the moment that we have Councillor Gibson. You are moving an extension of time for another 3 minutes to Councillor Harriman. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Howe. Thank you very much. Councillor Harriman, you have another 3 minutes after 9 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry, Mr Mayor. So as I was saying, the trees they're saying we shouldn't be harvesting are the ones that we're getting up to $5,000, $10,000 a tonne for. They're high-value trees. That's what makes it so important that we keep them available. If you're looking at high-quality furniture, if you're looking at flooring, if you're looking at what they call, I've lost my train of thought, sorry, Mr Mayor, veneering, they normally take a very high-quality tree, which is your mountain ash, your messmates. So your beautiful bench that you have at home that cost you a fortune is made from this quality timber. The lesser quality timber they get out of native forest, which is also a hardwood, can then be turned into engineered timbers, which is your glue lam, your cross-laminated timbers, which are being used in structural buildings. They can use them, I think in the Forte building at the moment is 6 stories, which is in Melbourne. They're just building one in Queensland, which is 18 stories, entirely made of timber, and it's from native timbers. To give you an idea of why this is very, very important that we come out and seek GLGN support, the Queensland State Government 2 weeks ago announced they were actually taking 10,000 hectares that was designated to become state forest and giving it back to logging for a couple of reasons. Number one, the economic value. Number two, it's been accepted by the Queensland Government that the forest is actually in a better condition when it's looked after by loggers. And number three, it reduces the threat of bushfire simply because the foresters and the loggers provide 80% of the equipment that goes into fighting a fire. You take them out and it's going to be a huge, huge impact. So I'm moving, Mr Mayor, that we go to GLGN and seek their support to express our disappointment related to the decision to close it, express the disappointment in the incorrect statements recently communicated as part of this decision, that being that they're stopping old growth logging, which is incorrect. It's already been stopped. Highlight the impact on Gippsland and the ramifications for Gippsland into the future. We know there's 21,000 jobs directly employed in this industry. Request the state government review this decision and request a joint meeting of concerned councils with the Premier of Victoria, Minister for Agriculture and Regional Development, with the hope that we can actually get this decision reversed, similar to what happened in Queensland. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. Councillor Law, you were the seconder in this. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following on from Councillor Harriman, I think he's said the majority of it. It just clearly, I feel that this is a knee-jerk reaction to a minority group within the Melbourne burbs, and it affects us directly. We don't really realise that the amount of people that are involved in the trucking industry and in the timber industry that are actually affected by this. There's a lot of families and communities in their rural areas close by us that are going to be drastically affected by this knee-jerk reaction. And I think we need to look out for our smaller cousins that are going to need the help of us to help the East Gippslands and such to get over this issue, because at the end of the day, all we're saying is, or what the government is saying, if they stop this, then Tasmania will say, hey, there's a great opportunity for us again to go back into this type of select grade logging and timber, which they will probably jump on straight away because it will value add to their economy and help them. So I'm not saying that, but what we should do is look after ourselves, and I think this is a well-managed product that has been done for the last 100 years, and there's no reason why it can't be continued to be well-managed over the next 100 years if we do it properly, and I think we can. Done.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Are there any other speakers for this motion, or Councillor Middlemas? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a slightly different take on this issue. in that everything is predicated on the state government intervening and finding jobs for all the small businesses, for all the employees in this industry, and finding alternative jobs for them. Now, we only have to look back over our shoulders 2 or 3 years at Hazelwood. Was that successful? I will argue constantly that it has not been successful. To again come out and say, we'll look after all those who fall through the cracks, I want to see the detail, not just we'll allocate 110 million or we'll do this or that. I want to see the detail of how people who live in some very small communities, many of them, how they will be, how their futures will be changed and how they will be compensated. And by compensated, I mean found suitable employment at the same type of pay, etc. I don't think that's been worked through properly, and that's what I think we need to be talking to the government about. This won't work, or this doesn't appear to be able to work on a number of levels. We've heard from the pure timber side of it. Let's look at how we're going to manage all these unemployed people. And we've got the record. Just go out there, talk to our community. It hasn't worked well, and I can't see it getting any better.
Thank you, Councillor Middlemas. Are there any other speakers for or against? Yes, you've got a question, Councillor White.
Question through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Harriman, really. He did refer to plantation or hardwood, and he talked about a particular area of the timber that had been harvested and then reharvested, and I think it's the third time reharvested. What I think it's important for us to know is can he sort of indicate where that site is actually? Are you in a position to be able to help us there?
I am, Mr Mayor. Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor White, it's an area of land that is the proposed Great Alpine National Park. It was burnt out, I believe, in the 1851 fire. So it's not in...
I don't remember that one.
No, I missed it by that much.
No.
It is, from my understanding, it would be in East Gippsland, but it's one of the main areas that a lot of the timber and a lot of our truck drivers actually run to get work. Sorry, does that help?
Thank you, Councillor Harriman. Are there any other speakers for this motion or against this motion? No, if we have no other speakers. Councillor Harriman, you are entitled to close.
Can't help myself, Mr Mayor, sorry. Just to reiterate a couple of points that other people have brought up. Graham's right, this is about jobs and we can't afford to take any more hints. Graham would be happy to know that I was actually talking to a F Forestry Union member on Saturday who made a point that he believed that this was just another way that they could keep a building across the road full of people for another 10 years. The cynic in me did not agree with that, but a number of people that we were standing around talking with at that time did happen to agree. They also made the comment with $120 million as the figure to help out, there is a trucking operator that's sitting within 5 kilometres of this building, just one, that's involved in the hardwood industry that has $25 million plus worth of equipment sitting in his yard. That's one. I know that there's one that's associated with a football club where my son plays, who has $5 to $10 million worth of equipment sitting in his yard. That takes a big chunk out of $120 million. It leaves a lot of people without a future. And it's not as though they can transition straight into plantation, because the equipment used to harvest hardwood is different to the equipment used to harvest softwood and plantation. So, Mr Mayor, I thank the councillors there for their support on this. If they've got any other questions and they've got a free half hour, I'd be happy to fill them in. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harriman. As we've had speakers and now Councillor Harriman has closed, we'll put this motion to the vote in relation to the state government's recent announcement to contact GLGN. All in favour? Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Middlemas, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Law, Councillor Howe, Councillor Harriman, Councillor White, Councillor O'Callaghan and myself. That motion has been passed. That was the last item on our agenda. We would normally close our meeting to the public to go into closed, but we have no items in closed this evening. So this brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, councillors. We are finishing at 9:10. Thank you very much.